All right, if everybody is located that, we'll get started. So the moral of the story here is costs have gone up, and that's we've seen unforeseen volatility here with projects. We've had the COVID issue, pandemic, supply and worker shortages through the construction industry and inflation on top of that. So we've seen anywhere from 30 to 60%, even sometimes higher increases in bids that have come in on construction projects. These are affecting probably more small communities rather than large communities, mainly because of the lack of contractors there or lack of materials in those smaller communities. And I've also seen a little bit higher prices the west side of Wyoming with some, I think, cement supply issues and things out of Idaho. So costs have gone up, and what that has led to is a record number of amendments that we've received applications on for construction projects that are short of money, either that have bid or we're planning to bid here and had updated construction cost estimates from their engineers, and have seen, applying these new rates that the prices have gone up and they now don't have the funding that's been appropriated, or that's not enough to get the project done. So right now, between accounts 1 and 2, again, I would refer you to the first two sheets. My main discussion here is on accounts 1 and 2. Account 3 is, we don't have a lot of projects under that. Most of our applications are account 1 and 2, which is our new development and our rehab program. So we have 19 construction projects that have requested amendments between accounts 1 and 2. And as you'll see when you look at those tables, that's kind of the second block of projects. And on each one of those are the amendments. And that adds up to about $14.5 million worth of amendments. And then we've got 12 new construction projects.
I'm not following you. When I look at that, it shows in that second block under level 3 here. The level 3 project needs 19 million.
Yeah, well, let's see, 19,446. I'm not seeing that number.
If you go all the way to the right column.
You looking at account 1 or account 2?
So that's the balance.
Yes. So maybe I'll just let me walk through the tables here real quick first, and then that'll help explain that. So let's just start with account 1. That should be the top one in your pile. So if you, on the left side, we have our tabs column. So when you get into your e-notebook, the recommendations e-notebook, those are the tabs that those individual project recommendations are under. The item number is just to keep track of how many projects there are really. Then of course you have the project name, the priority from our criteria, the requested funding that the sponsor requested. Then you've got the recommended funding, which we'll have much more discussion on that in the next couple of days of why we're either recommending what they've asked for or slightly different or a lot different. And then comments, there's a few comments as you'll see. And then, okay, so all the way over on the far right on account 1, you'll see the fund balance of $26,270,953. Sorry, I didn't say that right. $26,270,953. And that is the account balance for account 1, okay, currently. You get into account 2, it's the same thing. Account 2 is a little different when you look at the spreadsheet here, just because the account balance on that far right, fund balance, is $3,905,680. And to do what we're proposing over the next couple of days, we're going to need to transfer money from account 1 to account 2 like we've done in the past to cover that shortfall. So the transfer, which I will get to, is going to need to be $11,200. Would then, if that was approved, then you'd have the fund balance of $15,105,680. Everybody following? No? On account 2? Yeah. Sorry, I jumped over just to go across the top real quick. So again, the fund balance, 3.905, is the existing account balance. with the recommendations we're going to be talking about over the next couple of days, and I'll explain this more here in a minute. To do what we want to do, we're going to need to transfer money from account 1 to account 2. And if that is approved in the amount of $11,200,000, then the fund balance in account 2 would be the 15 million, okay? And then, okay, so now let's go back to account 1 again real quick. Yeah, and David's got it up on the screen here too for the audience to follow along with and others. Is that being shared? I don't know if you can share your screen or not, but. Okay, so then when you look at account 1, the first block of projects is level 3 projects. So those are new projects, new construction projects. And if you look under recommended funding, you go down to the bottom and you see a subtotal of $1,955,060. So that's going to be the subtotal of the new level 3 projects that we're recommending funding for. And then you go over to that far right, just past where the column ends, you see 24,315,000. So if you start with the account balance of 26,270,000 and you subtract out what we're recommending for funding for the new projects of 1.95 million, then what you have left is 24,315,000, et cetera. And then you go down through that a little further, then we get to the amendments for account 2, and we go through all the amendments. We have a subtotal for the recommended funding on the amendments, which is 4.869. You go over to that far right column, and it's just, again, you're subtracting that out of what you still have available in account 1, then you've got 19 million left, 19,446. And then you've got all of our planning projects that we talked about last May. Level 2, we've got an amendment to an existing level 2 project, and we've got our level 1 studies, and then we've got the one at the bottom, which is our general UW Water Research, and that's where we get into this account transfer and sponsors contingency funds. So if we approved everything that is being recommended, the total would be $25 million, but that includes that transfer. So it's really about 14 million of projects or amendments or what have you. We'd end up with a balance of $697,000 in account 1. And account 2 spreadsheet is set up exactly the same way, with the difference being we show it going negative if we didn't have the transfer versus with the transfer of the 11,200,000, you end up with a balance of 123,000 and change if you recommended all those with that transfer to account 2. Everybody following that? I appreciate that question, Senator Hicks. Thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is what we're dealing with here. So between these two spreadsheets, like I mentioned, we've got 19 amendments between account 1 and 2 if you add them up. That equates to roughly, now just the amendments, roughly 14,400,000. Our new construction projects between account 1 and 2 are roughly $35 million worth of requests. Then we add in, our small water program, cloud seeding, planning, UW Water Research, sponsor contingencies. Put all that together, we're basically at $62 million worth of requests. And if you add up the funding balances on top for account 1 and 2, we've got about $30 million to work with. So we've got twice the requests as we have funding. So obviously we're not going to be able to fund everything. So the balance here is, how do we keep projects moving forward? And the idea is we had to, on existing construction projects, we had to set kind of a timeline on what is shovel ready and what isn't shovel ready, because those are our first and foremost projects we want to continue with and get completed. So we set a time frame of September 1, which is the application deadline for new construction projects, is September 1. It always is September 1. So we talked with our project managers, and those that had enough information from their existing projects where we got amendments in on an existing construction project, if they were able to provide the, I guess, more or less a concurrence to bid to a sponsor, then we said, okay, those are shovel ready, or they may have already bid. So that means their design's finished, they've got all their permits in place, their easements in place, all that stuff, they're ready to go. So that was kind of our tier one existing construction projects that came in the door for amendments. Then we also thought about, okay, there's some projects that maybe aren't ready to bid right now or as of September 1, but they're getting pretty close. So how do we handle those? So that's where we're going to be talking about putting money into the sponsor's contingency fund. So when they do bid, if they are over, then they can come back to the commission and the select water committee to get into that sponsor contingency fund to get additional funding that way. And the reason we set that up was a lot of the projects that are ready to bid have good cost estimates or have already bid and know how much they were under or lacking of funding. Whereas some of these other projects that are getting fairly close may not have as good of an idea of what the costs are kind of come in at. So we don't want to commit a bunch of money to a project and then ends up being too much money, and then it's stuck on that project and we can't get another project done. So if we do this sponsor contingency idea, they're only going to come back to us for what they need. And then the next one will come into us for what they need, and we'll go as far as we can until the sponsor contingency funds are depleted. Yeah.
Existing balance in those project contingency funds, and then how much we've spent out of there.
And if I could, I'll get to that, and we'll actually look at the recommendation and we can go through those numbers.
All right.
If that's all right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so those are existing projects and amendments. So that's kind of the general thought on how we've dealt with our recommendations. So things that have been ready as of September 1 got priority. Projects that we knew were over budget, over budget, they're not going to have enough money. They're not quite ready to go. We're going to handle those with sponsor contingency funds. Now we've got our new projects, and what do we do with new applications for projects? So new construction, it's generally we see that ag projects move along faster than municipal projects, and there's a number of reasons for that. They're usually simpler designs. You're putting ditch in the pipe. You have easements that are easier to get on construction projects because typically you've already got easements, or they're prescriptive easements. They've been there forever. That's not always the case for municipal projects. And I guess just the engineering, the design is simpler. So they tend to move faster. So what we've done then is you'll see when you look back at the different accounts on the new projects, you'll see a lot of projects in account 1, which is our municipal projects generally, that we are only funding pre-construction only. And you'll see that in the comments. There's several of them where they've asked for Happy Valley, for example, they've asked for 3.8 million, but our recommendation is only to provide them 308,000, which would be the design and the easement, getting easements and all that stuff, getting ready to the point where they're ready to go out to bid. And then they'll come back next year for funding to actually go out to bid when they're ready. So then we're not tying that money up and typically this probably isn't going to hold them up any, because it's going to take a year or so to get that design done and the easements in place and all that stuff. When you look at the account 2, again, those are our agricultural projects. We're funding most of those to what they're requesting. And that's because we think they're going to move along fast enough where they could probably go to construction possibly next fall, winter, okay, and not hold them up. So that's the thought behind. And then in addition to that, I would say, there's a lot of money floating around out there through bipartisan infrastructure law and additional funds going into drinking water SRF. And maybe there's some opportunities for municipalities to look at that in the meantime and try to leverage some of those federal dollars. And I've heard a little bit of maybe there's an appetite for more ARPA money for projects. I don't know if that's true or not. Sounds like that might be a discussion tomorrow as part of Select Water Committee. So there may be some potential there too for these municipal projects that we're doing pre-construction dollars only to go look for additional funds before they come back to us next year. Okay. And then we've got planning projects, which in order to get to good construction projects, I feel very strongly that we need to have good plans in place to vet when sponsors come in the door with a problem, you know, understanding what their issue is and what's the best way to fix it and the best alternative to fix it. So we're using public dollars in the best way we could. They're a good investment for the state of Wyoming. So I do think planning projects need to continue forward. So then we have develop our next batch of construction projects, you know, 2 years from now. So we'll kind of maybe jump over now real quick. So does anybody have any questions about just the general concept that how we approached basically having half the dollars as the amount of requests that we had to deal with here?
A real quick question, and you already brought it up, was the ARPA money, but we also have $478 million in the clean water and the safe drinking water revolving account. What are we doing to coordinate? Because we put $50 million into SLIB for water and sewer, which a lot of these, under the rules, the guidelines that we got from Treasury Department, a lot of these municipal water projects may be eligible for those ARPA dollars that 50 million that SLIB is administering. And then I think the balance between the safe drinking water and the clean drinking water account that DEQ administers is $478 million. Are we coordinating these applications to look at those as the lenders of first choice before they come to water development? Or how are we handling that, Jason?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, for quite a few years, I'll say the past 5 or 6 years, for our municipal projects, the ones that would be eligible under the Drinking Water SRF program, we have just automatically sent all those sponsors to Drinking Water SRF to get their loans. So that's been a kind of a policy for quite a few years now.
Now, when you say get their loans, that would be for construction only, but not planning, correct?
That's right, yeah. And I'm not totally certain how Drinking Water SRF can be used for planning, if it can be. I've heard some of that. We've had some of those discussions, and I think, you know, they're getting into this conversation about set-asides, which was passed in statutes last year, and we're starting to have those conversations. So there may be some opportunity there, but I'm not familiar with it enough to know exactly right now. But it's something we'll continue to look at for Drinking Water SRF. Now, the ARPA funds, you mentioned also, so SLIB just got done, was that last week, October 26th, I think was the date, where they considered the applications that were put in front of them for the ARPA, the $50 million for water and wastewater, and approved, I don't remember exactly how many projects it was, but there were way more applications than there was funding for. I want to say that was $200 and some million worth of applications, and they had $50 million. So, and we know that a couple of the projects that we're talking about, we'll be talking about, I guess Thursday, they're municipal projects again, were funded. And those were projects that they're existing projects. They came back to us for additional funds. They asked for those additional funds through ARPA, and I think they're going to receive them. And those are ones that we said don't recommend funding for anyway.
Okay.
So we're aware of those, which ones were,
You
and
are
there's 2 of them.
coordinating that with SLIB then?
Yes.
All right.
Yep, and we were involved in the review process of the applications that came in the door for that water and wastewater. We looked at those for costs and eligibility and, you know, the technical kind of side of things.
So could
is
you
how
just
we're
describe that process that you work with? Who in your staff work with who in SLIB to review those applications and then make those recommendations? Because it's their staff, can't remember the gal's name that runs the program, that makes the actual recommendations
Yeah.
back.
Mr. Chairman, Beth Blackwell is
Beth
the,
Blackwell.
yeah. So Jennifer Russell with our staff is the main person who does drinking water SRF. With the ARPA projects, there were so many of them, we had to basically get all of our construction staff involved in that to get it done in time. And so we were all involved in that. And then well, I don't know if that's,
So you guys reviewed every one of those applications that had been put in for ARPA that went through SLIB, or the ones, I mean, the municipal projects?
yeah,
Okay,
for technical kind of stuff.
Correct.
Whatever information they gave, we looked at it. You know, was it an eligible project, did we think, under SRF criteria? Because that was, we knew that would have meet it. And then, you know, we looked at the information they provided for cost estimates to determine if those were reasonable or not in our minds, was our main push on those.
timeframes, permitting conditions. all that.
Yeah. DEQ reviews them as well for certain things, and State Lands has a group of people that reviews them as well. So we all kind of have our little parts of the review
All right,
based
thank
on
you,
our
Mr. Chairman.
expertise. Okay, so I guess getting into real quick, just the transfer of funds to make our recommendations over the next couple of days work. If we go to tab D3, D as in dog. This is where we have our recommendation for the $11,200,000 transfer from account 1 to account 2.
Mr. Chairman, or Director Mead, I'm having a hard time finding D3.
Okay.
All the way right there.
Miranda, if you want to show on the bookmark
Okay.
side, 1, how to open the bookmarks, 2, how to navigate to D3. If everybody wants to watch how she's doing it up on the screen here.
It's page 307 of the PDF.
That's the easiest way to find it, right?
Okay, so you click on the main level here, and then you'll go under, I think it's level 3 projects by clicking the arrow, and then you scroll down to tab D.
We're in account 1.
Oh, account 1, I'm sorry. Is it this?
We are in the recommendation notebook, is that?
That's right.
Okay.
Oh, D3. And which one is level? That's D2.
Under the general other.
Let's see here.
Okay, apologies, I'm sorry. So it's going to be under the new development program is going to be the main level. I want to click that.
Okay.
Then click under the level 3 projects. Or I apologize, scroll down and go under general other. And then D3 is underneath that level.
Okay, Jen.
What page number was that on the PDF? 307. That's probably the easiest way to do it. So maybe as we go through these, and there's not going to be very many today, so tomorrow when we go through these, I'll follow along with you guys and just say, we should be on page number 307, for example, and that might just make it easier for everybody. So if you're on page 307 of the PDF, you should see the transfer of funds from Water Development Account 1 to Account 2.
And just one more thing, and just for clarification, and the page numbers are up in the top bar there, is
Yeah,
that
that's
correct?
probably another good thing to point out. I don't have a way, I wish I had. a way.
Okay, so if you see up here by these arrows, you can highlight this number here and type in whatever page number you need. And then example 307, you can press enter and it'll go directly to that page.
Thank you.
All right, so again, this is just the recommendation you guys will be considering tomorrow morning, once we go through all the applications for Account 2. And if you go down to the summary table, you'll see Water Development Account 1 projected balance, and that's the same balance you see on the Account 1 spreadsheet at the far top right, $26,270,953. And then with the requested transfer, you then would end up with $14,373,940 left in account one. And then to take that one step further, if we then go through and fund all the recommendations that we're proposing in account one, we'll have an ending balance in account one of $697,000 and change. And in account two, very similarly, again, our spreadsheet, far top right, beginning balance, $3,905,680. We add the $11,200,000 from the transfer, and this next number is really more of the recommended funding amount. So if you look on our spreadsheet for account two, at the bottom of that recommended funding column, you'll see if we recommend all those, we end up with $14,982,150. Sorry, I keep saying that wrong. Roughly $15 million, so that's that number. And if we fund all those, we'll end up with a balance of account two of $123,000. The next thing I want to point your attention to is then these contingency funds, as Senator Hicks was alluding to. So if we go to E3, which should be page 308, next page down. Oh, I take that back. Oh, sorry. Type it in right. Yeah, that's right. So this is our sponsor contingency fund recommendation for account one. And what we're recommending is the uncommitted budget. So just to quickly walk you through what that amendment looks like. The existing legislation is over the years what has been appropriated to the account one sponsor contingency fund. And just a quick recap. So what that is it's basically money that's appropriated to this account similar to a project. So then throughout the year, the Water Development Commission, along with, Select Waters Committee review, can react quickly to projects that come in overbid for construction projects or changes in construction projects for some reason or another. And we don't have to wait a full calendar year to go back through the legislative session again to appropriate that money towards a project. So as you'll see, there was $2 million appropriated back in 2006 and then another $1 million in 2019. So the original, I guess the full appropriated amount in there was $3 million. And then we've had a number of project appropriations over the years where we've used this account one sponsor contingency fund to make up for shortfalls. So the balance in the account right now is $1,460,298.58. So there's been about $1.5 million worth of projects that have been funded through that, or additional funds added to existing projects. And what we're recommending is another $4 million be added to that. So then the new balance will be roughly $5.5 million in that sponsor contingency fund if that $4 million is approved, that appropriation. And so then I've done a little bit of math that you don't have. Under account one, some of these amendments we are suggesting or recommending we do fund because they're ready to go, ready to bid, and some we're not because either they didn't ask for more money or they're not quite there yet. They were kind of this tier 2 shovel ready. And that's where we're saying, well, come back when you're ready, ask for sponsor contingency funds. There's roughly $7 million worth of unrecommended funding there when you look at the account one amendments. So this, $5.5 million that we could end up with in account one will put a pretty good dent in that. And like I mentioned, there's possibly some other funding sources out there that we want them to go look to first, such as SRF or ARPA or other things that might be coming through bipartisan infrastructure law. And if they can't find anything there, then come back and we'll talk about it at that point. So that's account one sponsor contingency fund. Account two sponsor contingency fund is under tab A2. And you'll have to give me a page number for A2, David. So page 161. So this recommendation is set up the same way, if everybody's there. So the uncommitted budget is $2,148,000 and change. There's been quite a few different appropriations to this account over the years. And what we're requesting is another 1.2 million. So there's been $5 million appropriated if you look under the existing legislation over the years from 2006 through 2021. And then the actual projects that have been helped out equate to roughly 2.85 million, which gets us to that what's left in account 2 sponsor contingency, and that's the 2,148,000 and change. So if we add, what we're recommending here is to add 1.2 million of that. So that's part of that transfer money. Because this will be contingent upon that $11,200,000 transfer from account 1 to account 2. And you see that up on the top portion of the recommendation, that contingent language. So then you'll end up with roughly 3,348,000 or so. And in that one, we're sitting pretty good. Most of these are getting pretty close to being ready to go. So there's only, I think, one that we're not recommending funding for, and that's Dry Creek Irrigation District in the amount of 580,000. So we should be able to cover that one if they're not able to find other funds. So that's the sponsor contingency funds. Do you have any other questions on those?
What's the balance in our Buffalo Bill account?
I'll let David look for that. I don't have that number fresh in my head, but it's a good sized number. I'm leaning it towards not utilizing that so we don't continue to chase this inflation and hold on to that until future years, until we maybe see some of this come down a little bit. Was my initial thought process on any kind of transfer of funds from Buffalo Bill this year, but.
So, Mr. Chairman, I can't help but be a smartass, but just when is inflation going to come down?
I don't know. Good point.
So it could get worse, or it could stay the same, and at the same time, we're deferring because other costs are going to go up. So it's a risk assessment, right? Whether we fund something now, or you just sit on money and we lose 8.5% a year due to inflation.
Yeah, and I would say that on the Dry Creek, if I remember right, if I'm thinking of the right Dry Creek project.
And Mr. Chairman, Director, I'm not suggesting that we overturn your recommendation on Dry Creek. I'm just saying, we're looking at what, $5.2 million in inflation fund request for account 1 and account 2. That's all going to be assuming that those numbers are fairly accurate, that's going to be spent due to inflation.
And also, yeah.
And I just wonder whether we wouldn't be better off using part of that money out of that Buffalo Bill account and maybe looking at some of these other projects. But
Mr. Chairman, the only project that's really, we feel like is only going to be affected, and I can go look at that Dry Creek one in a little more detail because I think we had good reason on maybe holding that one back. But so that's really the only one that's not being funded under account 2 agricultural rehab projects. And the ones in account 1, we're funding all the ones that are ready to go, but those ones that aren't quite ready to go, they can come back to the sponsor contingency. And yes, they're, if they all come in the door, they can't find other funding, then yes, we'll be short roughly $1.6 million with that sponsor contingency by putting in the additional funds that I've mentioned. So there is that option, I guess, of, you know, if you wanted to cover absolutely everything, you'd be looking at little over $2 million out of the Buffalo Bill account, probably to,
And what
Sure
was
that
the
up.
balance?
Mr. Chairman, the Buffalo Bill account is a little over 19 million currently, but there are a handful of future things that are earmarked out of there right now, including the Fontenelle Reservoir account riprap project and some maintenance at High Savory, a couple other long-term things, but it is a balance of a little over 19 million currently.
And so what's the encumbered balances, obligations towards that?
None of those funds are actually obligated, they're just projected as
Yeah.
future expenditures, so
Potential encumbrances.
yeah.
So
That's correct.
what was that number?
It's a little over 19 million, about 19.4.
okay. So if there's no other questions and just a general concept that we're following here, we'll jump into a few projects, particulars, and walk through those. So David, I'm gonna need your help again. We're going to tab B2 first, and that's the Cheyenne Bory Wellfield 2023 project.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Simpson is also joining us virtually now, so.
Okay.
And that's page 164 of your PDF.
164. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is a new application from, for the Cheyenne Bory Wellfield 2023 project from the City of Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities. And the project is to expand the Bory Wellfield by drilling 2 new wells. And then they've got 2 existing wells. I believe it's the Belvoir number 5 and number 6 wells that have been drilled in the past that they want to then basically tie in to their treatment plant. So then it would include constructing the pump houses and the SCADA and the transmission line, I believe, of about 25,000 linear feet of transmission line to get that over to the Sherrard Water Treatment Plant. And there's actually a Corps of Engineers treatment facility that would run through first. And the total request for that is around, well, the total project cost for that is about $10 million. They're requesting from us, the original request was, I think, 7 million. Yeah, 7,035,000. We took a look at that and had a few conversations with Board of Public Utilities, as well as all the sponsors that submitted applications. We've looked at all those cost estimates and massaged them a little bit in conversation with the sponsors. So the request would be for 6.7 million in the form of a grant, 67% grant. And we're recommending to do not fund at this time. And the reason for that is we don't feel like there's enough information necessarily on what those wells would produce, because they haven't drilled these 2 new wells. And then what would the pump sizes need to be, and what would those transmission lines need to be sized for to get that water over through the core treatment and then eventually to Sherrard treatment plant. So again, in the name of, I guess, more applications than funding, we don't want to appropriate more funds than we need to a particular project if we don't feel like they have enough information or a good enough cost estimate, because then it's going to be tied up for that in that project for the next several years, and when it could be being used to get another project on the ground. So I think what we will be suggesting with them, and we've talked to them about this a little bit, they understand the situation, Board of Public Utilities does, is to look into our groundwater grant program, which is it's a 75% partnership, more or less, on, which would be for drilling these 2 wells. The cost estimate for these 2 wells is roughly $1 million total. the groundwater grant goes up to $400,000. So when they get invoices in, they send us an invoice after they sign a groundwater grant agreement, and we pay 75% of that invoice, they pay 25%, up until we hit $400,000. So in reality, what we're talking about here is we're leveraging our dollars against their dollars. They could go drill 2 wells that are roughly, the estimate is $1 million. We're gonna have $400,000 into that. So 40% versus 67%. They seem amenable to that, and we just wanted to point that out because that's one of the projects where that we're not suggesting we fund, and they had a request in for $6.7 million or $7 million. Any questions on that one?
Mr. Chairman, a couple of questions. The first one, they've already got 2 existing. Have they pump tested those to know what those yield?
Believe they have. George, yeah, you want to come up? Mr. Chairman, I believe they have pump tested the 2 existing Belvoir wells.
Mr. Chair, George Mosier with the Water Development Office. Yeah, the 2 existing wells, the Belvoir number 5 and the Belvoir number 6, were installed as separate phases of a level 2 project in the mid-2000s through the Water Development Commission, so they have in fact had pump tests done on them. We have a good understanding of what those would produce, and probably pump sizing and motor sizing associated with those. The great unknown is what would these 2 new wells actually produce?
And I'm assuming these are all in the groundwater control area. Are they or are they not?
They are not. They are actually just west of the groundwater control area.
Okay. And then explain the Army Corps of Engineers groundwater treatment facility and why we would run this water through that facility.
Mr. Chair, this area is associated with a long-studied plume of TCE that's related to some missile site activity. This is on the leading edge of that plume, and so the Corps has volunteered up. My understanding is on 5-year contract basis with Board of Public Utilities to do the airstripping operations to treat the TCE that might be in that water. It's a system that kind of, it's conjoined with radon stripping, so they can use a basic air stripper to remove the TCE before it goes into the Sherrard plant.
And that's already up and running?
Yes, it is. My understanding is that they just renewed a 5-year contract on that, so they should have a continuing contract through the Corps for the operation and maintenance of that facility.
Commissioner.
I just wanted a follow-up question on that. Last I remembered, that facility wouldn't handle, I think that it's almost at its limits for their wells that they run through there currently. Are they planning on, since the board doesn't own it, they won't be able to expand that to get to that, to when they add those 2 new wells, would the federal government going to pay for that cost?
Mr. Chair, that's actually a really wonderful question and something that kind of we beat up a lot. My understanding of that treatment facility is that it was specifically designed to be scalable in 3 separate phases. And right now they have basically built out phase 1. BOPU, I think, believes, hopefully I'm not speaking too strongly on their behalf, but they believe that the Corps is an active participating partner in this. So once they need additional capacity there, adding phases 2 or 3 should not be much of an issue.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, can we talk a little bit about, George, the sequence? And so they have 2 existing wells right there that they need to get hooked up and bring additional capacity on. And even if they go in and they do the groundwater exploration, are they going to hook these up prior to that? Or so they're just looking for a lot more capacity in the system, and then they would put all the transmission together for all 4 wells at that time and then run it to the, I'm just trying to figure out the sequence of their construction activity. So if we do groundwater, I would anticipate they drill those 2 wells and they're good wells, then they'll be back asking for the transmission to all these facilities for all 4 wells. Is that how you see this rolling out?
Mr. Chair, I think that's a fair summary. One of the concerns that exists on the Level 3 project is that BOPU had kind of wrapped in, we have 2 wells, we're hoping to drill 2 more wells, and we would tie that all together in one pipeline. So, of course, pipeline sizing for the 2 unknowns becomes kind of part of the issue here. Under the groundwater grant program, which we've offered to them or suggested that they apply, ultimately, a groundwater grant would have to be considered by Select Water for recommendation to commission and commission approval. But what they could do with that is have a firm understanding of what the productive capacity for the 2 new wells might be, and then we would have a really good idea of what that transmission pipeline should actually accommodate.
So my recollection, Mr. Chairman, if I can continue on that, that groundwater exploration program, that's not something, we just fund that through the legislature, kind of like a block, and then you guys, what's the balance in that account? Given the fact that they're going to be coming in looking for at least $600,000, probably before 400.
Mr.
Yeah, 400 from the state said. So what's the balance in there?
Mr. Chair, the balance in that account is roughly $1.1 million, and that's accounting for the things that we have encumbered under our 3 current and active groundwater grant projects.
All right. Yeah, I think we just put more money in there this last session, didn't we?
Fairly recently.
The last infusion was 2019.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner.
I have one more follow-up as well. Do you know how far the 2 proposed wells are from the 2 existing wells? And then are they, I assume they're including that 2 or 3 miles of pipeline that would have to be installed for that as well, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, depending on the precise location for their 2 new wells, they're probably talking about a mile or between 3/4 of a mile and a mile to sort of be able to trunk those together to the existing wells.
I have just one question, Mr. Mosier. So to drill the wells, both wells was $1 million, is that correct? Both wells, or was it $1 million apiece?
No, the rough estimate that I think it would be is between 950 and $1 million for both wells.
Okay, thank you.
And if I might add, before we start talking too much about, 1 $400,000 and 2 $400,000, my suggestion would be that both of those wells be contemplated under one groundwater grant project.
Thank you, Mr. Mosier.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner.
just a quick question for Jason. Jason, they would have the opportunity to go after SLID money on this project as well, wouldn't they?
Mr. Chairman, I believe they probably would, yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Okay, they're going to.
Sorry for the fumble here. There is some preliminary information that they may also be applying for WaterSmart grant also to try to match some of those funds. So there may be more than one opportunity for them to find funds.
Interim Director Mead, further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, the only other thing I'd add on this particular project is by doing this groundwater grant idea, I don't think we're going to be holding them up any. And also that they've got 2 existing projects with us currently. They've got a transmission pump station and tank from 2020 that they're getting ready to bid. And then they've got the Crystal Bypass pipeline from last year that they haven't hired an engineer on yet. So they've got plenty of work to keep them busy, and so I think this is probably a good way to handle this.
Further discussion on this? Hearing none, next topic.
Thanks, George. Okay. Mr. Chairman, the next project we want to talk about is the Ethity water supply under tab I2. And
What tab was that?
I2, and that's page 206.
Page 206.
Okay, so again, this is the Ethity water supply for the Northern Arapahoe Business Council. And this project was to construct an alluvial well field, replace transmission pipeline from the Little Wind diversion intake to the Ethity water treatment plant, upgrade water pumps, and then make improvements to the water storage tanks. And what they want to do, so this is a modification request on an existing project. And they've received funds from USDA Rural Development as well. So it's a 50-50 grant from us and 50% being funded through rural development. And the project, of course, has come in. The estimates are more than what they expected. And part of what they want to do is to modify the project slightly to remove the wellfield pipeline portion of the project so they can complete the project, all the rest of the parts of the project within the existing appropriation. And one of the reasons for that is I think rural development funds are getting ready to expire pretty quickly here. And rural development is kind of pushing them, let's get as much as we can done with those funds and then come back with a second application to rural development for finishing up this pipeline or the wellfield pipeline portion of the project. So we would expect that they would then also come back for us for additional funds in the future. So our project, or I guess the request is the project modification and a 2-year time extension. And our recommendation is to, I guess, go forward with that. So we'd be extending the reversion date from July 2023 to July 2025, and then completing that wellfield pipeline portion at a later time under a future project request, both through us and rural development funding. So there's 2 or 3 that are kind of asking for modifications rather than additional funds to deal with shortfalls. So I just wanted to point this project out as being one of those that we'll be talking about on Thursday, in case we wanted to have any more discussion about it.
Mr. Chairman, Jason, when was the original award made for this project?
The original legislation was from 2010.
2010.
Yep. There's been quite a few time extensions on this project.
Is there further discussion on this project? Commissioner Glick.
Hang on. I guess it's not really a question, it's a comment. I know that the right-of-ways from where the treatment plant and the transmission line was proposed, it takes a while to get your any kind of easements or right-of-ways through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I know this is it's really hinders a lot of progress out there, and that was one of the reasons that this they always kept getting these time extensions, is from what I understand, more or less from right away or an easement to get the transmission line, because it crosses several different properties before it gets to where they want the intake. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, are we close to closing the easement issue or problem on this, or where does that stand?
Chairman, Bill Brewer with Wyoming Water Development Office. My understanding is they are making progress on this. However, their concern is with that rural development money closing out, I believe December of '23, or December of '23, they're not 100% sure they'll have it in that time. So they are making progress on it. In the last couple of years, they've made a lot of progress, but it's still a little bit up in the air.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer.
Chairman, I have one more comment. You know, with the federal lands and having to, and while it's under trust, held in trust for tribes, the process to even get a business lease or a right-of-way or a home site or anything takes an extensive amount of time. I know some people that put in for a business lease and it took them 10 years to get just a business lease. It takes roughly almost 7 to 10 years to get a home site or even an easement or anything. It's difficult. And I understand where they're coming from when they have issues with right-of-ways or easements.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'm very empathetic to the fact that BIA is a lot worse federal agency to deal with than some of the other land management agencies that I deal with on a daily basis. I mean, they can be very protracted, timely. I just think it's as we go through this process, as you know, if we get more applications going forward, understanding that in the future that commission would make sure that we get BIA approval up front before we obligate money for these projects. It's been a learning experience for everybody.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the next project we'd like to discuss is the Broken Wheel Ranch Water Supply 2017 project. This one's under tab J2 or page 209 of the PDF. This is another account 1 amendment application. So again, it's the Broken Wheel Ranch Water Supply 2017 project for the Broken Wheel Ranch Water and Service District. The original purpose of the project was to design and construct a groundwater well, storage tank, and transmission pipeline to meet district water needs, but it's been delayed by difficulties in finding a well site that a landowner is agreeable to. And I think they've finally found one. However, the current cost estimate is I think significantly, well, not significantly higher, but they're requesting $300,000 and an additional 2-year time extension. The original budget was for roughly $1.5 million, 40% grant from Water Development and 60% being funded through SRF and RUS. And we are basically saying no to the additional funding because when we look at it on that shovel-ready basis, they're not ready, or they weren't ready as of September 1. But we were, I guess, amenable to the time extension, realizing the difficulties they've run into. So a 2-year time extension to July of 2025. Getting back to Senator Hicks's question about ARPA funds and how we're tracking those, Broken Wheel was a project that applied for ARPA, and this is one of the projects that the SLIB board accepted into that $50 million water and wastewater pool of money. So we believe they're going to get funding through ARPA, and they should be taken care of. So that lines up with just a time extension for the funds that they have through us should be sufficient for them to get the project finished with that ARPA money. So just informational, really, that this was one of the successful ARPA projects.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, we look at the previous budget, we've obligated. The question is if ARPA doesn't fully cover, because they have GSR and possibility for months, how's that going to be prorated?
Mr. Chairman,
Doesn't cover 100% of the project. We've already obligated funding for this percentage how do you plan to then petition how much water development you responsible for costs?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think there's a little bit of, maybe I didn't explain it very well. So they asked for ARPA funds for the difference or the cost increase. So they, I think, probably the $300,000 they requested from us is what they requested through ARPA, not the full 1.5 million. Well,
So just to be clear, they did request 450,000 through ARPA and received the 450,000. So they should be funded. And what we would do, I guess, partially to answer the question on, we can lower our percentage. So the way the legislation reads is it's up to 67%. But if they receive additional funding from others, we turn back our percentage to make sure they're not getting more than 100% total payments on any issues. So once all the funding balances out here in the next few weeks, we will reevaluate what percentage. I believe we're dialed down to 40% now from the original 67, and we'll dial that back again.
Yeah, and so Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure, is that going to be a standard policy going forward? Because we're going to probably deal with ARPA funding again for this next go around, that we need to make sure that, because we have to have those funds spent by 2024 have to be expended. So that just, so we have a consistent policy where there's a mix of sponsor money, WWDC money, ARPA money, that the ARPA money is all spent first. Does that change the ratio then of both the sponsor? So are we going to keep the 40-60 of the balance of that? So let's assume it was $1 million project. They got $600,000 in ARPA money. There's a $400,000 balance. The way the current agreement reads, it's 40% state, 60% sponsor. Would that still be the breakout going forward, or are we going to revert to the 67% water development and then decrease the sponsor share?
Mr. Chairman, I would prefer, and we'll have to talk with their funding partners, that we spend ARPA first, if that's what we need to do because of the time constraints, then max out the federal funds, and then whatever's left we'll use water development funds for, and whatever is not used will get reverted back to the account.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I love that, except for we also have the sponsor funds, which may be actually fees and.
Well, I believe they've got,
And I'm just saying, not specific to this project, but all these projects that we're going to deal with this going forward, we need a consistent policy approach that if there's a 67-33, that are we going to stick with that for the balance if there's a differential there? Or are we going to say, no, you guys are on the, or we're going to, I just want a consistent policy on how we're going to spend those pots of money.
yeah.
So I agree with that. ARPA, other federal money, whether it's SRF or SLIB, because those are other ARPA match, or however that comes from, RUS, that we max out all those, but then I'm still worried about that sponsor water development commission ratio, how that's going to be partitioned out as far as the expenditures.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. It's a conversation we could have right now on what we'd like to see there, but I think it's somewhat project specific. Some of these, their sponsor's not going to have any money in it. You know, this one might be an example. I know they've got SRF and RUS money. So if the agreement with SRF and RUS doesn't say it has to be 40-60, it just is an amount of money from them, then we'll max that out. That would be one case. If it's, let's say there's no federal funding involved, or let's say there's Water Smart, for example. That's not a good one because that's more ag project, but let's say it's a 50-50 agreement that they have with the federal government that they're going to match 50 with our dollars and 50 federal government dollars, then we would, I think, max out the ARPA first, and I want to have a side conversation on that in a minute, so don't let me forget. And then you'd revert back to whatever's left over would kind of be under agreement, it had to be 50-50, right? Then you've got the situation where there is no other funding, it's just maybe a grant loan, for example. And I think at that point, you'd max out the ARPA, and then probably stick with that grant loan percentage, 67-33. So both parties are benefiting from that ARPA dollar. Now, the question I don't know that we know anything about right now is, my guess is not every ARPA project is right Nat's behind on exactly what they needed, and it's probably, in most cases, a little bit more. So what happens to those ARPA dollars that aren't spent? Do they revert back and then get into either the second pool, or maybe there's one more project after all these other ones revert money, or what have you, where it would be advantageous not to spend all the ARPA money because it could get another project done? Because that's kind of like state dollars in a way, but not, it's federal dollars been provided to the state. So.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just think we're going to run into this scenario in the next couple of years, and because we could potentially have 4 different funding sources in there, which would be their normal, and maybe they take out a loan through SRF, or maybe they're just paying it out of their normal assessments back, or their reserves and stuff. That we just need to craft a consistent policy that we're treating every entity the same, whether they're a municipality or a canal company or an irrigation district, that however, and I guess I would throw that back over into the commission's lap to start with, and say, maybe that's something that needs to, the staff needs to maybe come back and look and make it we just need a consistent policy going forward.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the only complication I see with that is every project is could be a little different. And like I mentioned, those examples I gave. And in some instances, I think we're always going to want to try to preserve water development dollars as much as we can. And
the
Max,
sponsor will always want to conserve their dollars.
exactly. And I think you need to look at that 2 different ways. If they have skin in the game and have a loan, then yeah, they should benefit from these ARPA dollars too. If they don't have any money in the game, then I think we're trying to max out federal dollars as much as we can, if we can. And again, it depends on the agreement they have with whatever federal agency they have funds through. So I don't know if you can have something that meets every situation all the time.
Mr. Chairman, that would be part of the policy.
What's
I mean,
that?
that allows the discretion of the commission.
Yeah.
On a case-by-case scenario, but the policy would be ARPA first, federal dollars first, sponsor dollars at the exact same ratio of the original grant, or is that negotiable going forward? And then we may run into the scenario where you may overrun the budget again. And then they're going to come back and say, water development, I'd sure like some contingency dollars out of that, which changes that ratio too. So there's 2 scenarios, one that it comes under, one that it comes over budget. At the end of the day, they're going to come back and say, we want to renegotiate the deal. I just think before they walk in here, we need to say, well, these are our guidelines that the commission has to work within. Does that make sense, Mr. Chairman?
It does. I'd like to throw it out to the other commissioners or other select water committee members for any comments.
Do we all know that the federal government allotted a bunch of dollars towards clean drinking water? And if they did, where did those dollars go? Are they into a program that we have today, or haven't they been allocated? But as far as I know, it went through, I thought, legislature back in Washington, D.C. Does anyone know anything about that?
Yeah.
And I think it was several $million.
So
an
Mr. Chairman,
allocation.
we had a bill that we, because of the federal expenditure, so the bill last year obligated $478 million. May have been 476, but it's a lot of money, and that's for both the Safe Water Drinking Act and the Clean Water Drinking Act. Both of those are administered through DEQ. They're mostly loans, but they can also give a significant amount of that loan as what they call loan forgiveness, which is basically a grant, but it's kind of an after the fact, and they can ask early on, and then they've got guidelines on how much loan forgiveness that you can ask for. But there is a lot of money sitting in 2 accounts.
There is. But what about the new account? there was a new allocation, I thought, that came out. And I don't know if it was a different program. I'm familiar with the SRF and the DWSRF, but those are different. I thought there would be different programs than what just recently happened.
Yeah,
This is
Mr. Chairman,
months ago.
yeah, I think they had not only additional funds for the existing SRF programs, but then they had add-on funds for the next couple of years. And I think it's a matter of, is the state of Wyoming going to decide to take those capitalization grants every year for drinking water SRF, because they have been doing every other year because of the lack of interest in the loan piece? You know, everybody wants grant money, of course. So I don't know if that's all been decided. Then there was stuff for broadband through the BIL and lead lines and so on and so forth.
That's right. And
which
that's
gets
what
back
I
into-
recall.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be mostly grant money at the time that I saw the allocation, but
So, Mr.
if
Chairman,
it
you
went
may
through our
be,
same programs, then that's where it is.
and you
There's
may
no
be,
new program.
you may very well be referring to the ARPA bill, because that eligible projects in there were municipal water projects. And so
Right.
out of the $1.2 billion that the state of Wyoming got, we allocated $50 million of that this year, of that ARPA money, and that's the money that these guys applied for. So there was another bill. We've already allocated 50 million of that to water. It was overprescribed. But we still have about $75 million of ARPA that we haven't obligated. And that'll be a battle, but certainly Select Water could entertain a supplemental water bill that would include some funding out of that, again, back to SLIB if they were so inclined. But that may be what you're talking about,
I think it is.
because it was
yeah.
for municipal projects, and that, we took part of that money and give that 50 million to SLIB to do that.
Because I really believe that that's where our application should go prior to them coming here with the Water Development Commission if they
And
can.
Mr. Chairman, it sounds like they did do that. You guys reviewed that. That's correct, Director?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. If I remember right, the application deadline was August, first week of August or so, August 12th, maybe. So it was right before our September 1 deadline for applications. So a lot of folks put in for us and ARPA to see. And then, like I said, the SLID board meeting that took the recommendations from state lands on which projects should be funded was on October 26th, which was just last week. So
Well,
so it's
thank you.
kind of hot off the press. but-
That satisfied my concern. Thank you.
Okay. And we'll take into consideration this idea of a consistent approach, kind of try to brainstorm the different scenarios and how we would treat those. And have another discussion about that, I guess, at some point in the future.
Yes. Commissioner.
You said something about I guess I'll call it a deadline for use of the ARPA funds, a timeframe. What is that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the applicants for those water and wastewater ARPA funds, don't quote me, I think it was August 12th, the applications needed to be in. So that was a deadline for the first round, I guess. And of course, there were way more applications than there were funding, so there won't be a second round at this point.
And then is there a time frame on the expenditure of those funds?
Mr. Chairman, you might have that.
2020, December of 2024, I believe those have to be expended.
Needs to be obligated by 24 and spent by 26, I
Six,
think,
yeah,
right?
that's
End of
correct.
26, yeah.
So then a comment, I have quite a bit of experience in past employment with language in cost share funds is how we used to term those. And I'm reading this WWDC grant of not to exceed 67% of eligible costs. And then this is footnoted from the numbers above that, the grant is at 40%. Where did we come up with the 40% when the 67% would have been allowed?
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe what happened was a lot of times funding program timelines, what we were just talking about, don't line up. And a lot of times federal programs want to see that sponsors have their share of the matching funds in place before they will be considered for a federal program. So they probably started off with coming to us at a 6733, then went to SRF and RUS and got funding, and then we were able to change our agreement, or when we put the agreement together, take that all into consideration and back off on our grant funding to 40% instead of 67.
Okay, so then to follow up, Senator Hicks has suggested that the commission formulate a policy, I guess, for lack of a better way to state that. Seems to me like the first thing that might need to be done is to define eligible costs. So if we have a project, this round number say is $100,000, and the eligible costs would be anything not covered by other participants, whether it's the ARPA funds or other funds that are available. Now, I think that it would be up to your office to maybe define that, or in some manner bring it back to us that we could look at and see if it makes sense. Because I think Senator Hicks is on the right track by suggesting that there needs to be consistency. I think we might open the door for some issues if we don't have consistency in these situations.
Mr. Chairman, I think most of the time, all the things that we consider eligible would be eligible under some other program, with the exception of maybe easements or something like that, or purchase of property, for example. But what I've been, at least my short time as interim director, I think it's pretty apparent that our funding is very limited, and it's been limited. We get a certain percentage in account one based on a cap of the mineral severance taxes of $155 million. So that equates to roughly $19.3 million for account one and roughly $3.3 million for account two. And that hasn't changed since 1990 or something like that. And of course, the value of the dollar now is less than it was then. So we're getting less projects done. On top of that, we have Board of Control that's funded out of our account one now, which equates to roughly 14,800,000, if I remember right,
Yeah, that's close.
per biennium. So if you start running numbers, and of course our budget comes out of account one as well for our employees, which is roughly half that, $4 million. We've got about $11 million. If we start from scratch next year, which we're kind of going to be doing, we'll have about $11 million between account one and account two to fund projects, plus any interest we gain on the accounts and any, loans that we get paid back and things like that. So my message to everybody, I went and talked to WWDC. We've been going around the state for these critical aging irrigation infrastructure public meetings, is that we really need to get our sponsors to apply for federal funding when it's available, and not just automatically think that they're going to get 67% from water development and they just need to go look for 33%. Water Smart does 50-50. There's a cap, but we should be looking to maximize those federal dollars first and then come to water development, because we're going to need to stretch state dollars as much as possible in the future to get a percentage of what we've been getting done. So with that, I think a good policy, or I guess maybe just support from the commission and the Select Water Committee, is for us as an office to continue to preach that, I guess, to our sponsors, that they know that they're going to be looked upon more favorably when they show up to these meetings requesting funding through applications, if they have federal funding or less than a 67% request in front of everybody here, which will encourage them to do that. And have plans to sit down with conservation districts, who are really the on-the-ground folks, as you know, Senator Hicks, knowing what their local agricultural community needs and what might be available, to start having those same conversations and how we can work together. Also with NRCS, there's a lot of EQIP dollars out there and other funding that I've heard, deadlines don't match up. Our funding schedules just don't match up very well. Well, how do we fix that? What can we do different to make that work better? Because I just feel strongly that we need to leverage federal dollars to the maximum amount possible to be able to get stuff done. So that gets to what you're talking about without having to really determine what's eligible for every project. I think we just need kind of a stance that, hey, you guys need to be beating the bushes. We're talking, internally, we've already adjusted our scopes of work and our planning projects to really try to set sponsors up to be ready to apply for federal funding, knowing that, we're doing a master plan or we're doing a feasibility study through agricultural, type of a project. Really, what are these programs that particular project could be eligible for, and identify that in the project, understand what the application looks like, what information they're going to need, put that information without actually filling the applications out for them, but in an easy manner, put that information they're going to need into the project report. So then they can just take the next step and go get that money. And so I think that's all things we've been talking about at the office, and I guess everybody's support on the commission and select water committee would be very beneficial in that, implementing that.
Senator.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you brought that up about there is a lot of federal money out there right now. I had a conversation on the way up today. I wasn't gonna, it's probably just as good to talk about it now that you brought the subject up and stuff, but there is a couple programs out there that the state entities are eligible to apply for. And I verified with the NRCS today, one of those is the Regional Conservation Project Program, Partnership Program that they have. And one of the things I'd like to see is the water development be the applicant. And I asked them specifically, is the state or a state entity be an applicant for those programs? And they said, absolutely. And so one of the things that, again, these alleviate the need for some of the states, but these regional conservation project can be in pretty large geographic area, and they have special emphasis areas around the nation that one of the things that I'd like to see us do is have the office be the sponsor, and knowing full well that they've got a pretty good workload now. It may be something that Select Water looks at either doing an AWAC position or putting enough money in to do a contract position. In my other day job, we have an arrangement already between NRCS with their PL 566 program, where they're paying 50% of the cost of the environmental impact statement, matching state dollars for the West Fork of Battle Creek project. But we need to get better at tapping into these federal sources of funding. That RCPP program, they'll pay anywhere from 70 to 90% of the cost. And it would all be irrigation infrastructure. We'd probably look at applying for Colorado River pot of money, specifically for efficiencies and conservation measures for irrigation, which would be about a 5-county region. You're going to have all the Sweetwater, portions of Carbon, most of Sublet, Lincoln, and all of the corner of Uinta that would all be eligible. And then those are normally administered through normal EQIP contractors, producers come in. But you have to have an umbrella entity. And we don't have an umbrella entity for 5 counties over there. There's no single entity and so one of the things that I'd like to see us do is go ahead and either allocate some money towards, and this is a discussion for the commission, and it's the first time I've had a chance to visit with the director and the staff, because I just got confirmation 2 hours ago that yes, water development would be an eligible entity to apply for those funds, but it reduces the potential cost on our program and provides more service out there. You could also go after, they have a state pot of money that you could do these for other areas within the state of Wyoming too. So the question would become, and something that we don't need to answer now, would be go back again to the director and say, would we be better putting money to hire another staff position to start to help chase these federal dollars? And line with all these other programs? Or would it be better for every one of these as they pop up, just allocate some money to hire a consultant? So I don't have a predisposition. I mean, there's pros and cons both ways. But it's something that I do want to breach, that we actually pursue. For those of you that don't live on the Colorado, things are starting to get a little interesting over there. State of Wyoming has already allocated an additional position to the state engineer's office. We've hired another water attorney. We're gonna spend a lot of money in the Colorado River Basin and here going forward. And eventually what it's gonna come down to, one way or another, you're gonna see a water transfer. Water's gonna move away from agriculture and it's gonna go to industry. It's gonna go to municipalities and it's gonna go to the lower basin. And so if we can get in front of this thing now, there's a lot of money being thrown out there by the Bureau of Reclamation, obligated $500 million to the upper basin to start to figure this thing out. We could use several of these federal programs to start to address those water shortages in that part of Wyoming. This would be a pilot, like I said, if we decided it was best to put a position in the office to go chase all these federal funds, whether they be water smart grants with BOR, RCPP, PL 566. We've already done this with this PL 566 program, I believe, twice with water development for Dull Knife Reservoir, and then also we got to get better at chasing the federal dollars. And the question is what's the most efficient deployment of state capital and resources to do that? And so I think that's a discussion that we need to have, and then have a recommendation prior to markup of the omnibus water bill in December as to how we want to tackle that, because we're missing the boat. There was $8 billion set aside in the Infrastructure Act for the Colorado River. BOR got a part of that. They've said 500 million for the upper basin states. So we don't know what Wyoming's allocation is, but we're not chasing it right now either. And I know Utah for a fact is highly engaged in discussions with the BOR on how much money they need. We've had some preliminary discussions for the state engineer's office, but we got to get better at this game. And so give that some thoughts. I would hope that, go back, visit with the staff, make a recommendation to the commission. And certainly I think that's something that from my position as vice chairman of Select Water, I would like to see us come up with a recommendation in the omnibus water bill to either fund it through consultants or fund it through another FTE or an AWAC position in water development to be able to chase these federal funds. Your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with all that. We all need to take as much advantage of this federal funding as we can. Not too long ago, we kind of retooled the old River Basin Planning head position to be more of a technical resource coordinator, which we moved Chase Tavelli into that position, knowing we had all this. That was kind of right in advance of the bipartisan infrastructure law coming out. But we also have all of our regular jobs to do. So when we are all crunching to try to get November meeting stuff done and there's all these other things going on, yeah, that suffers a little bit. I don't know if it's another full-time position or we'll have to give that some thought. But I do think it's worth the discussion. And a lot of these, are going to be project specific, like I mentioned, identifying stuff in studies for certain sponsors and doing a better job of not just kind of throwing everything at the wall saying you're eligible for 10 different things. Let's pinpoint a couple and get them lined up and ready to be able to apply for them. This idea of a regional type area through the regional conservation program is a kind of a unique thing. And I don't know about that one. We have to give that some thought and understand those programs better to where you're not dealing with an individual sponsor. You're not going to have a study or entering into a contract with the Bureau to do some kind of a regional plan and then start implementing that plan. I'm guessing that probably is how that would work. So yeah, it's something we need to look into. We can continue discussions outside of this meeting and
Yeah,
see what
Mr.
makes sense.
Chairman,
I don't know if we'll be
the
ready for this
RCPP
session. but
thing wouldn't be an FTE. That's not a full-time job.
I didn't, can you restate that in here, what you said?
Like the RCPP thing, even
Yeah.
at those regional bases, that's not a full-time employee, but
Yeah.
there's other things, just like the infrastructure money that we applied for LaPrelle Dam. You know, again, somebody that's chasing all these different pots of federal money out there. I don't think that we take very good advantage of the Water Smart program through the BOR, primarily because these federal programs are extremely complicated and they're time consuming, and most districts lack the technical capability to wade through the bureaucratic morass of all the different federal agencies that you have to chase money with. And so maybe it's all of those. It's Water Smart, it's infrastructure, it's ARPA, it's RCPP, it's PL 566, it's SRF.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with that. You know, part of these critical aging irrigation infrastructure, that's always a mouthful, and I can't help just saying the whole thing, but these public meetings we've been having, 10 across the state, we've done 6 so far. That's one of the things we're trying to get out to folks is we've got Bureau of Reclamation. We don't have them there in person, but they've put together kind of a talk that we have recorded that we provide, and with the PowerPoint presentation, and we have the local NRCS folks there and conservation districts to talk about the programs that they can, you know, help with EQIP and so on, and to try to get those landowners engaged more. So we're trying to get the word out that way. But yeah, some people just don't have that technical capability within their offices. But I do think, and I've heard that skin in the game isn't necessarily a bad thing either. So I don't know that we want to hold their hand completely because then you might suffer some potential maintenance in the future. If you don't have any skin in the game, you're not as likely to take good care of stuff as you would be if you have some money into it either. So there's different ways of thinking about it. I think we just need to continue the conversation. We'll continue thinking about it. I don't know that we'll have, you know, by December, a firm grasp on how we're going to handle all these things. A lot of this stuff's being rolled out by the federal government. By the day, things change, and, you know, we know a lot, but I don't know that they know everything on how they're going to get this money out, even on some of these programs, new ones especially. So, but yeah, I think we're committed to doing as much as we can to stretch our dollars to get as much done as we can, so.
Commissioner.
I guess I want to reiterate on these federal programs. First thing, and I think somebody hit it right on the head, that they're very complicated. The application can take you up to a week or a month. Depends on if you have the right person in the office filling it out or not. The other one is, there's the Davis-Bacon. You're involved in the Davis-Bacon Act, which is a set amount that you have to pay employees. And you also have Buy America. By the time you take some of these programs and you add those elements, even though you may get a 25% forgiveness, in some cases it'll go to 50, but by the time you take the 25 and you fill out the program, get the money, that's why you don't see a lot of municipalities going after that funds, because is it really worth it? Some of the cases in this material can cost you 20% more if it's made in America. I've seen it. So is there, you know, when you look at the advantage, yeah, federal funds are there, but when you weigh the element, it could be a wash. So that's another factor. They look good. You probably can get them, but there's some bad parts with them too, the costs.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with that, but I think you'll probably end up on the positive side of that. You know, if we can get away from just always the 67% and getting that down to 50%.
I agree with that too. Let's use them, because let them pay the cost. Let whoever applies do it. But I'm just saying, on the other side, that's why you don't see a lot of these applications going directly to those programs. they're gonna try and use us first. Thank you.
Commissioner.
I know through a lot of these federal grant programs, first they come to us because we can get their designs and stuff pretty much ready, and a lot of these are required to have designs prior to. So I can see it going both ways, but I know that sometimes they'll need to come here prior to in order to get the proper backup documentation in order to apply.
Thank you, Commissioner. Director, do we need a recommendation here to any further action on this? It sounds like you were asking that support from the commission and Select Water that in the cases of cost sharing, you'll ask applicants to pursue other funding sources first before state dollars. And I guess, do you feel like you would like a support from the commission and Select Water on that? Formal support or?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chairman, just, you know, a raise of hands maybe is, I don't want to put it in criteria because then we get so rigid, we can't be flexible and stuff, but it's a pretty simple concept. I think everybody would probably agree with it. And when we show up eventually, when we're saying, hey, we've got two projects that are the same, these folks have done their work and have 50% federal funding, so it's only a 50% match from us versus this one that has a 67%. They want 67%. We're going to give it to the 50-50, and that's going to give everybody else incentive to go look for other funds so they have just as good of a chance to get state dollars as they can. So I think if everybody supports that with a raise of the hands or a nod of the head or talking to me afterwards, that's good enough. Then I can continue to get that word out to folks, our sponsors.
Which direction would you like the head nod? Up or down or side to side?
Up.
You didn't specify.
How about everybody thinks this is a good idea, raise their hand.
Mr. Chairman, before we do that, could I ask one other question?
No.
Commissioner, please.
It seems to me like really what you're asking for is business as usual. Am I incorrect in my assessment?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that it's business as usual. I can just be a little more persuasive when I'm out talking to folks and know that I have the backing of the commission and the Select Water Committee.
Can you write that down so that we have a record of that be more persuasive?
Yeah.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Glick.
A lot of this stuff, a lot of these applications and stuff still come back to us, so the commission still kind of decides in a sense. So by Mr. Mead going out and being more persuasive, I believe that's good. It's just, we still have to make our motion to approve or disapprove. Thank you.
Yeah.
I will just mention that the Water Development Office has been persuasive on this. I attended in Lyman and in Pinedale some recent meetings on aging infrastructure, and the message is seek other dollars first, and that was very clear. So the office is doing a great job on that. And there's one other issue here that Senator Hicks brought up that, you know, just get a show of hands. Do we support at least researching what it would take to assist conservation districts and others in pursuing other federal dollars? I mean, you know, or at least, I know it's a big job. You know, it sounds like it could be just a part-time thing, but as Commissioner Suker said, some of the stuff takes a month just to figure it out. So do we support researching that or coming up with a recommendation?
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
I think we as an office just need to start by, I've already had conversations with some conservation district folks, and I think we know that one conservation district is not necessarily like another. because of how they're funded, what kind of staff they have or don't have because of financial constraints and what have you. So I'd like to just have some conversations when things settle down, which I don't know when that's going to be, but to just understand how we could work better together so they can be a partner with us when, because a lot of times conservation districts are the first stop when landowners have an issue. We're talking mostly irrigation projects at this point, but so for them to be able to point us in the right direction of, or talk to their local landowners about, well, yes, we have this pot of money, but we also know there's these federal funds, and kind of be a better partner with them. And the federal agencies, we have good relationships with federal agencies already, but talking more with the, I don't know what you call it, the field offices rather than, you know, the folks in Casper or what have you. And getting on the ground perspective of how things are implemented and how they dovetail with our program and timing and how we might be able to do things better, partnership. So I don't know that there needs to be any recommendation. That's just work that we need to do within the office to make things more smooth, I think, between all the different agencies out there. But
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that's all good. We also have to work within the timeframes and the constraints we have, which is if you don't do anything now, we just have conversations. There would be no money to go into the budget until 2024. That wouldn't be signed until March of 2024. I'm not willing to kick this can down the road that far. I think we have to have something now. It's 2022. Make a recommendation through this bill, then by the time you stand up some type of program, you're into the middle of 2023. Rollout may be into 2023, 2024. If we don't make some recommendation prior to the time that the omnibus water bill is constructed between now and December, you've lost a whole year and a half's worth of opportunity, and then you have to fit within the federal timeframe too. So realistically, you're saying, well, we're really not going to do anything for 2 years as far as on this effort before we could potentially be, you know, on the long end. So I guess I would look for something sooner than later and try to get something done, you know, a recommendation by December to put in the omnibus water bill if that's the direction that we want to go.
And Mr. Chairman, when we talk about a recommendation, so I talked about individual projects and trying to be able to work that into our scopes. And I think we've already done that somewhat in this last round of scopes. But to make a decision on, do we need another full-time employee, for example? We don't, and the only place I see that fitting in is where we have this RCP program, which I really don't know much about at all. And where we have these regional type studies or partnerships with the federal government to then kind of roll out a whole new program. I don't know that we know enough about them or can get up to speed enough and to have those conversations in advance of, say, you know, a month from now when we're talking at the December meeting to determine, yeah, we would need another full-time employee for that. That's where my hesitancy comes in on that time frame for a recommendation. I'm not sure what kind of recommendation you guys would be looking
The alternative
for.
then would be as if there is specific projects out there, is the budget to go out and hire a consultant. The difference is that subtracts from your existing budget,
Yeah.
where an FTE would bring at least dollars in there to cover that cost. Well, it's still going to come out of the account one.
Well, and I'm thinking, okay, well, let's try, as we learn here as quickly as we can, let's try to do what we can with what we've got. And then when we realize that that's stretching us too thin, then we look for a full-time employee or whatever it ends up looking like,
So, Mr.
maybe at the
Chairman,
next session, but
the way to
we'll talk
maybe
about it.
handle this, just thinking with the
Yeah.
constraints that the directors talk, and it would be to authorize an AWAC if it was determined the need existed. In other words, those are part-time state employees that the agencies go out and contract for work, but they actually work in the agency. And so if it became a workload between now and the next session, you would at least have the option to go out there and hire that. It was authorized, doesn't mean you have to go do it. So if you could handle it internally, you can handle it internally. Would that provide more flexibility?
Mr. Chairman, possibly, don't know how that works, I guess, if we have to go ask for a supplemental budget,
No, we would put it in the budget.
just for a, basically
We
like a
do this with
one-time
other agencies,
thing.
Authorize them to go ahead and hire a part-time employee. Doesn't mean you have to if you don't need it.
Yeah.
But the authorization's there.
Senator Steinmetz has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we do that all the time in the budget to authorize you to expend funds on an AWAC if you need it. But also, I think we have a unique opportunity in the fact that Hans Hunt is working in Senator Lummis's office. He's served on this committee and the Ag Committees for several years. And I'm wondering if we could utilize him in some way to help us with some of these issues, because he would be familiar with our process and our programs, as well as maybe be the bridge between some of the federal and where he's plugged into the ag part of that. Do you have much contact with him or any of our federal delegation?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, obviously I'm familiar with Hans and him being a legislator, and just a little bit of interaction with his, another person that works for Senator Lummis's offices that used to be a legislator as well, and his name escapes me, but I think you know who I'm talking about. He was partially involved in the West Fork project and came and toured that with us. So not saying that's, it's a good idea. I think we could look into. I know we have some retired previous employees that might be good options to help us out with some of these things if they're so interested in working again. But yeah, that might be an idea. One question I would have would be, how do you fund an AWAC? Does it come out of do you just take it out of whatever is left in account one, or do you fund it in some other way outside the program? And does it take away from our ability to do projects?
Normally, it would be the agency's budget, but where you guys are off not on the general fund, it would come out of yours. Now, that being said, if we did a supplemental bill, supplemental water bill, we could put more money into that if we were so inclined to do that. Now, a lot of these federal grants allow you to go ahead and bill them back. So I was just telling Representative Paxton here is that I just did a $7.8 million one, and we'll actually pay for all of our expenses out of that. But you got to incur the expenses up front and then bill them back. And so not all federal grants are that way, but usually they allow you to take out a certain percentage of administrative costs to do that. But
Okay. Well, let us give that some thought between now and the next meeting, and we can open up that discussion again. Then the next meeting is not a joint meeting. Just to remember or remind everybody, we do the water development meeting, and then a day later or so, we do the commission or the select water committee meeting. So we won't be all here as a group like we are now. But I guess we can think about that and talk about it again at the next meeting, whether we think an AWAC would be appropriate and what that looks like and how you pay folks and what the dollar amount might be.
Is that satisfactory to the commission and select water? Hearing no objections, take it away.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I just had this conversation 2 hours ago.
No,
with
that's
the
a good
feds.
one.
All right. So, Mr. Chairman, if I could continue.
You may.
So the next project we want to have some conversation about is on tab PP2. I gotta get my computer started back up again here. Should be the Melody Ranch Water System Improvements 2018.
Page number?
Yep, that's what I'm trying to get to here. My computer fell asleep. 223, page 223. Okay, and this is just another project that we wanted to bring to your attention, similar to the last one. It's for the Melody Ranch Improvement Service District. Just been some delays. They've been looking at trying to find a deep water, groundwater well, and that's created some delays over the years. Costs have increased, and they've requested a very minor change.
Interested in a deep aquifer because they don't want to do interference with an alluvial well.
Yeah.
What's the geology? I mean, I know this come up a couple of years ago. There was to expedite this project because they were ready to go, and now that we're not ready to go because they want a deeper well and not an alluvial well. Do we even know there's deep water there?
All very fabulous questions, Mr. Chair, and pertinent to the topic of the groundwater exploration grant project. Tomorrow, I will be presenting a closeout memo for that particular project. To summarize, I would say the level 1 study that was performed for Melody Ranch kind of did a cursory review of their existing shallow wells, but then one of the perhaps oversights is that they did not evaluate a neighboring deeper well, something within a deeper productive horizon of the Snake River alluvial aquifer. At any rate, there were some indications that there may be a deeper zone there on the order of 400 feet deep as opposed to a 75 to 100 foot deep well. The groundwater grant project did look at 3 different locations for trying to target that deeper aquifer. 2 of them were relatively unsuccessful. A third could potentially be successful if they were willing to deal with some of the fine sand and flowing sand problems and try to design around that. I think it would be fair to say that the sponsor and their current engineering firm have changed tactics a couple of times over the years on whether they would like to pursue something that's shallow and maybe close to existing infrastructure. Maybe they would like some isolation from that upper aquifer and potential contamination concerns for shallow aquifers. Ultimately, I think it's appearing that the deeper aquifer is fairly elusive for them. So we're probably back to square one for this project. And I don't want to steal too much thunder from the groundwater grant closeout, but if there are more questions about trying to find a deeper productive zone there, I can certainly entertain those.
So Mr. Chairman, as I understand, they're going to close out this agreement, but they've asked for a 3-year time extension. What did I miss in your explanation?
I probably neglected, Mr. Chair, to point out the nuance that we have here. Tomorrow, I will be closing out the Groundwater Exploration Grant Program project, which is something completely separate in a funding stream and a contractual agreement from what they currently also have under a level 3 project, and we're proposing to have an amendment on.
So, Mr. Chairman, did they max out the 400,000 under the groundwater exploration program?
Mr. Chair, they did not max out the 400,000, but they did end up spending more than 25% of what was authorized. Groundwater grant project, we can do up to 75% of the construction costs of the well or whatever exploration costs they might have, not to exceed 400,000. Their original project as contemplated under groundwater grant was not even 400,000. And they chose to tack on some other things as a result of that, and they incurred more than 25% of the costs of that project.
So, Mr. Chairman, why are they not going back to the groundwater program for this deeper well?
Mr. Chair, I don't know that there is actually a plan for a deeper well at this point. That would be something that I think would be a further question.
Here, and I got the impression that they wanted to go for that deeper aquifer.
And
Still not gonna develop the wells they have, that they're gonna go try to drill another well. Is that correct or incorrect?
yeah, Mr. Chair, the crux of this is that they have two shallow aquifer wells, and I'm not reading necessarily what Senator Hicks is looking at here, but maybe there's some nuance in the language that the sponsor really would desire that, and they are hopeful for a deeper aquifer well, but I'm not sure that it's panning out for them.
So,
Is that the way that reads, sir?
well, it says here, the sponsor desires a deeper water aquifer well to reduce the potential for surface water interference, which leads me to that they're gonna go out and drill another deep well. If that's what they desire, I'm assuming that's what we're obligating the money for, is to go drill another deep well based on their desires. And so why wouldn't they then go back through the groundwater program instead of come to the normal program for the 67% cost share?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Brewer again with the office. Their current plan is to drill a shallow well, which we have agreed we would cover the cost for. They are contemplating the idea of, once they get through that shallow aquifer, continuing to drill deeper. We said we would not, on the level 3 program, pay for that deeper exploration because we don't feel that the search has paid off to this point, so we don't want to pay for any more under the level 3 study to search anymore when we know there's a productive aquifer shallow. I did agree that if they paid the cost to drill the deeper well on their own and found a substantial source down there, that we would consider casing down to that well, because we would like to use a deeper well, but we didn't want to spend any more money chasing when they've already looked a few times and are not finding that deeper aquifer.
So we encouraged them to drill deeper.
We
We say we're gonna pay for it.
we said we would not pay for the
The drilling
exploration.
costs, just the casing costs?
Right. And we would only consider the casing cost if they find water. If they don't find water, we're back to the shallow well that was originally agreed to in the original application back multiple years ago.
Thank you.
We have a request for a 10-minute break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, 2 hours. 2 hours, we go 2 hours easy, right? Yeah. Well, there, I didn't even push it. Yeah.
Give it a second when you push it.
Oh, is that what it is?
It takes a little bit to respond from you, but you're there.
Miranda has requested that we all speak into our microphone with the microphone on. That would be green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can also control your microphones from here too, so if you forget, I can get that, but you just gotta lean into the microphones.
Thank you, Miranda.
So I'll just kick us off here just to get everybody in the right spot. Are we good? Meeting?
On your mark, get set, go.
All right, Mr. Chairman, the next one we want to talk about is on page 253 of the PDF. 253. I feel like a bingo announcer here. So let's see where we are here. So this is the Douglas test well study. It's a current level 2 study that we're recommending an amendment for, and we just wanted to have a little bit of conversation for it. I'll turn it over to George because it's groundwater well related.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. George Mosier, again, with the Water Development Office. This, I think Jason mentioned, page 253, for folks following along, is a proposed budget increase of $450,000 to the Douglas test well study, sponsors City of Douglas. And what this would do, if so favorably considered, would be to two different things: extend the reversion date under the current legislation and also increase the budget for the drilling activities. Essentially, Douglas has been looking for a number of years for another groundwater well or groundwater supply to augment their existing system. This is a project that was originally funded in the 2017 session. The drilling budget under that planning study was originally $800,000. We have this year gone out to bid twice for drilling efforts on that. The first bid opening was September 6th, and we received a whopping 0 bids. We subsequently contacted the plan holders for that effort just to see, get an idea of what is the problem, what's the issue here. First thing, many of them said that they're backlogged by 4, sometimes 5 months. And so they were not really sure whether they would be able to meet the current window of opportunity for drilling. And just as an aside, we kind of polled them informally to see if you had put something together, what kind of costs were you thinking about? The lowest number that we heard was about $900,000. The highest number that we heard was about $1.4 million. We thought, okay, well, let's give it a try and extend this out, put the construction deadline out by at least a year and see if we get somebody to bite and actually submit a bid. We got 1 bid at bid opening on October 3rd. That was for $1.13 million. And the bidder, my suspicion is that they purposefully did not submit a bid bond, so we were required, of course, to reject their bid. But either way, that was a formal bid that gave us a sense of what the construction costs might be. So you'll notice that we're aiming just a little bit over that. The intention would certainly be to come in under the combination of those appropriations, which would be 1.25, would be the ultimate pool of money for drilling the well, if the 450 is added onto it.
If there's no questions, we'll move on to the next project.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator.
I'm assuming that if this bid actually come in higher than what we'd appropriated, you could cover that out of the contingency funds or not?
Mr. Chairman, this is a level 2 study that we're drilling this well under and not a construction project. So no, we would not be able to do that. They would probably have to come up with the funds on their own if they wanted to make up the difference. Correct?
This is under the groundwater program or not?
Mr. Chair, this is a traditional level 2 feasibility study, not groundwater grant.
So it's not construction, so it wouldn't be eligible for the contingency funds.
Correct. It would not.
All right.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I mean, welcome to my world. Living just right there in the middle of the Powder River Basin, it's hard to find anybody to do this sort of work. So just wondering have you reached out to the city of Douglas, see what they may be able to do to help out, or what has been the conversation talking to the city as far as the challenge you've had trying to find people to do this sort of work?
Mr. Chair, I think there probably are two different answers to that question. The first is solely, is Douglas amenable to making up the difference, if I'm reading the question right?
I'm just wondering what the conversation's been to this point. I assume you've been working closely with them.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, so we certainly have. My understanding from Douglas is that if this is successful, they are hoping to, just pay out of pocket once it comes to a level 3 project for ultimate acquisition of the well. But at this point within the office, we actually brainstormed how would we think about combining multiple pools of money in order to go forward with the level 2 project, and it seemed really, quite frankly, really cumbersome. The second question that I think sits in there is, if we're having trouble finding drilling contractors, is there a potential solution to that? And the other piece of this, at least in my mind, is thinking, if we have a groundwater grant project with Board of Public Utilities, for instance, we talked about that project a little bit earlier, I'm hoping that it will be a little bit of an advantage to contact some of these out-of-state drillers that didn't come in and bid on the project and say, hey, look, we've got several of these. Can you guys keep these on your horizon, and maybe you can stack them up and limit your mobilization fees and try to attract some more outfits that might bid on the project.
Thank you, Mr. Mosier.
Okay, next project we're going to talk about, we're kind of switching over to account 2 now, projects. So grab that spreadsheet. The first one is Dry Creek Irrigation District Phase 5, 2023. That's under tab B, as in boy. And bear with me, I'm trying to find the page number. 14, page 14. Okay, so again, this is phase 5. It's for the Dry Creek Irrigation District. And basically what they're looking to do is replace some pipe in a lateral LS1. As I mentioned, it's 5th phase. These different phases of construction projects are coming out of their 2016 master plan. And this one, the original budget, I believe, was for about 1.5 million at a 6733 grant loan. We're currently saying do not fund this request for an amendment. Actually, this is a new project. Sorry, there's 2 Dry Creeks. One's an amendment, one's a new project. And the reason that we have this recommendation is really a couple things. So due to the size of the request and other projects that they already have that need to be completed, they've got as you can see there in the existing legislation, they have had a project in 2017. They're kind of on a every couple years, they're ready for another project, 2019, and all up to date that they've been funded for is about $5.5 million of projects through the first 4 phases of handling these different laterals and putting ditch into pipe. They've got, I think they're just finishing up their 2020 project, and their 2022 project should be ready for construction here in 2023. So we feel like if we're not really going to be holding them up by not funding this at this time, and that if they reapplied in 2024, the way things have been going, their designs have been going pretty quick and getting faster every time, that they might be able to go to construction in fall, winter of 24. So wouldn't really hold them up considering the projects they already have in the hopper that they need to finish up. So just kind of a short explanation on why we're not recommending funding for that one. And that's really the only one in account 2 new projects that we aren't recommending funding for. And again, that it doesn't meet that ready to, well, we're just short on funding. So we've got to say no to some, and this one we don't feel like we're going to hold up by saying no now. So I'll move on to the next project unless there's any specific questions on that one. So the next project is under tab H. You might as well just keep giving me the project or the page numbers. 58.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one question. If this was funded, would that complete all of their pipeline? This is phase 5. Are they done after that, or is there?
No. Mr. Chairman, Sunrise Engineering's here and Jason Linford, so.
So what percentage would this complete their master plan? 50%, 75, 80%, 100%? We know that.
Okay, so under tab H is the Midvale Irrigation District Wyoming Canal Phase 1 2023 project. This was a new application we received in account 2. Again, we're on page 58 if everybody's trying to catch up. And Wyoming Canal, I think, runs over 2,000 CFS, so it's not a small canal by any means. And what they're looking to do, this is Midvale Irrigation District, of course, is they're looking to replace about 2.3 miles of the concrete liner because it's in pretty poor shape. And what we estimated, what they provided for estimates, we're looking at probably a $17 million project to complete that 2.3 miles because it's such a large canal. And to be honest, and I think we all know this, we just don't have that amount of money in account 2 or any of our accounts right now to tackle that all in one piece. So what we're proposing to do is to phase that into 4 equal pieces. So the first phase would be 3,000 linear feet. And what they are anticipating doing is applying for Water Smart funds through Bureau of Reclamation. And they think that they can probably max that out at $2 million. So if you look at kind of our funding breakdown that we would anticipate under this phase 1, it would end up being roughly a 53% grant. And then if they were successful in getting that $2 million, a 47% sponsor share. I think the only other thing to mention on this one is that this, and I think most of these projects in account 2 new projects would be contingent upon the transfer from account 1 to account 2, that $11.2 million transfer that we've been talking about, and you'll see that on all these recommendations. So with that, I would ask if there's any questions on that. We've talked to the sponsor, they understand the situation and agree to that. agree with our recommendation.
Are there any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner?
Jason, what happens if they can't get that $2 million grant?
Mr. Chairman, I think at that point, they would be looking at either other funding opportunities or potentially trying to handle that on their own, with their own
So we would just
assessments,
put the project on hold until they came up with their 2 million?
probably.
Mr. Chairman? Or they could use Jason's new AWAC position to apply for a statewide RCPP project to pay for part of that. In all sincerity, that would be the other source of funding that they could look at, is those type of opportunities.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into that conversation again in depth, but the AWAC position.
Just trying to put a fine point
No.
on that conversation.
But again, I don't know that it would, even if we had an AWAC position, I don't know that you'd be filling out applications for sponsors, but you would be helping them fill out applications possibly, or assisting them. I don't know that one person would have the capability of filling out applications for everything that came in the door, but more conversation to be had, I guess, within our office and other. Okay, next project is under tab K, as in kite. And I'll be looking for the number here, page number. 72, thank you. Okay, so this is the Goshen Irrigation District Tunnel Rehab Project that we had in front of us last year for the Goshen Irrigation District. And if you recall, this was where we're funding the, I guess, the pre-construction costs, the design, easements, things like that, in advance of bidding the project and awarding the project and then going to construction. And last year in November and then throughout the session, what was in the omnibus construction bill was $2.35 million. And again, just to help everybody remember, 49% of the Goshen Irrigation District tunnels is the obligation of Goshen Irrigation District, and 51% of those costs is the obligation of Nebraska and the Gearing-Fort Laramie Canal District. So what we did last year with that 2.35 is we basically took the 49% portion of that and we said that's a 67% grant, 33% loan to Goshen for those pre-construction activities. And then the 51% of that 2.35 million, which equated to $1,198,500, we're considering that basically a loan through Goshen Irrigation District if Nebraska needed those funds. And since that time, Nebraska has come up with their own funding, so they don't need that anymore. And we also know from our conversations, I don't remember when we've talked, I guess August was a big conversation where we've, I guess HDR has a lot more information than they do, or they did last November when this was all new. They were just hired on board from the district to try to get a handle on all the alternatives and what's the best way to move forward. And they've gone through some feasibility analysis, determined that the sequential excavation method of replacing or fixing up tunnel 1 and 2 would be the way to go. They have a better handle on what that pre-construction or design field investigation will need to look like. And at the August meeting, I believe the new estimate to complete pre-construction was around 3.9 million, which was significantly higher than the 2.35 that we had talked about last year. So with that, we've had further conversation, and our office has sat down with HDR and the district to talk through their scope of work and question some things here and there, and whether different things were needed or what. And at this point, I think we're down to roughly 3.5 and change, 3.5 million to do that pre-construction work. And so therefore, we're still short of that funding, because we appropriated 2.35 million. So knowing Nebraska has their money, We don't need to go back and get additional funds. What we're proposing is to take the 2.35 million and basically make that all 67% grant, 33% loan to Goshen. It was all to Goshen originally to Nebraska. It was kind of a, well, we know how that was going to work out. So if we change that all to 67-33, then we'll be able to cover the pre-construction costs, and any cost savings we can realize, so on and so forth, then can be rolled into the next phase, which would be construction management of that project. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what our recommendation is going to be. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, how come Nebraska is not paying for their 51% share of the increase in the escalated cost for increased preparation and final design and specifications?
Mr. Chairman, they will be. So,
Why are we allocating the full amount now?
so the 3.5, or let's see, the 3.5 million. So if you look down at our kind of estimate of numbers down at the bottom of that recommendation, we've got 3.297 and change for preparation of final designs, and we've got to go through some NEPA. If you add up those first and the third numbers, that's where you get to the $3,536,240, which is the pre-construction estimate without bidding an award of the project. So it gets us all the way ready to go out to bid, but not to actually bid it. And then we've got some estimates in here for easements and working to get permits through the BLM and so on and so forth, title of opinion, which gets us to this roughly 3.9 number. So not all of those are engineering costs. It's just the first and third number that come up with the engineering costs. So then you go down to that kind of second subset of numbers. Of that 3.9 roughly million, 49% of that equates to the 1.909158. So that's really what we need to come up with for Goshen to pay for their 49%. We have appropriated already from last year 2.35. What we're suggesting is just take that full 2.35 and switch that to all 6733 instead of the 49% being 6733 and the 51% being all loan. We're just gonna all move all that into 6733. Hopefully they won't need all that, and we could then revert some money, but the way this project is going, I hate to revert that money. We all know that we want to get this fixed as soon as possible. And we are being very vigilant, in my opinion, of questioning things a lot, and we'll be paying attention to how the designs go and how things play out from here. I think and HDR as well. They're hoping to realize some cost savings, I think, through the field investigations, and it just depends on how efficient they can be during the field investigations, whether they need 3 days for this or 2 days, if they get it, get it done in 2. So it's just kind of yet to be seen. It's a time and materials kind of contract through the Goshen Irrigation District. The contract's between Goshen and HDR. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but yes,
Yeah.
we're only on the hook for 49%,
Yeah,
both
and I see
pre-construction
that
and construction.
You got a potential balance of 448.42 in there.
Yeah.
Which is the differential I was looking for. It's been my experience of all the years that I've sat on that committee, every time we budget that, it gets spent with change orders when the engineering firm comes back again and again and again. We've had this discussion for years now. And so, anybody want to bet here that they come back with a change order for about $400,000? Anybody want to make a bet?
Mr. Chairman, I would only say that when we have change orders in front of us, we do not approve them unless they are justified. And then we would look for information back from the district and hence HDR on justification for every change order that comes up. And if we don't agree with them, we say, well, we're not going to pay for that. So.
And I appreciate that. And I know you guys have done your due diligence, but it just seems like every time we budget that, it gets spent. Real quick question on the budget. Does HDR have a NEPA compliance folks on staff, or are they going to sub that out?
Mr. Chairman, I believe they have staff. Is that, if I remember that, that's right, yeah. Yeah. They're a pretty big group and they've got quite a few different folks.
I'm just
expertise.
curious on a pre-existing structure, why it costs $238,000 to do NEPA compliance.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to ask them the question, we can sure have them come up.
Absolutely. I think that's pretty excessive budget for that structure.
Mr. Chairman, Corey Foreman with HDR, Senator Hicks. To respond to your question, that was our best estimate at this time for, with very limited conversations with the federal agencies involved. That is based on an assumption at this point that it will be an environmental assessment, knowing that there's significant historical resources in and around this structure. The complicating factor between this project, for this project on the environmental assessment side, is that Goshen Irrigation District is a transferred works district. So the Bureau of Rec owns the structure themselves. So they will be the lead federal agency and we will have to coordinate with them on anything that is done there. Second, BLM owns part of the surface above the structure, including around the inlets and outlets for both structures. So you will have to coordinate with the BLM as well. Lastly, there is the Fort Laramie National Historic Site within a half mile of the tunnel, of one of the tunnels. And there are sections of the Oregon Trail, California Trail, and the Mormon Trail, all within the general vicinity, as well as there is a grave on the inlet side of tunnel number 1. So you'll have to coordinate with not only the SHPOs, but the National Park Service as well, because of the the historic features in the area. So that estimate is based on the need to coordinate not with one federal agency, with 3 federal agencies, in addition to the state agencies that are also involved.
Mr. Chairman, so under the National Historic Preservation Act, even under the federal guidelines, you have to consult with SHPO. And so what preliminary discussions have you had with the requirements from SHPO, the state agency, as far as these characteristics that you just described? Because there's no disturbance associated with any of these. So a lot of these, you're probably just looking at your visual resources, is my anticipation. And so is it just a VMR that we're going to be dealing with? Because I don't think you're going to be digging up any graves to bore the tunnel out. So I get all the proximity. There's also guidelines on site distances and all that stuff that you can get through SHPO. And so what discussions have you had with the State Historic Preservation Office on this at this time?
Mr. Chairman, it's kind of been limited due to the fact that until we get a design and know exactly what disturbance, we will have some disturbance on the inlets and outlets of the tunnels, even just boring through the alignment of the old tunnels. But we've had some conversations with the Bureau, of course, and asking these questions. And until we have a design in hand, they really can't give us too many answers yet. So
I understand that, but you're talking about trails and cemeteries that are half a mile and a mile away from the structure. That's not going to be a disturbance feature.
correct. Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Yeah. So you wouldn't think there would be much, no, but
Well,
we
that's
really
my
haven't gotten
point. I
any
wouldn't think
answers
there'd be
yet.
much, but there's the $238,000 budget for not much, and that's what I'm a little concerned about.
Mr. Chairman, just from a little bit of experience with that, obviously that's not the full $238,000 budget for the SHPO, but if there's any disturbance of those portals, you know, they've got stamped on them 1907, maybe there might need to be
To ship.
documentation if they're going to be destroyed and rebuilt and all that fun stuff that we like to deal with SHPO compliance, so.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Chairman, I have a couple questions about the tunnels. I need to refresh my memory. So the plan is to bore 2 new tunnels, is that correct? Parallel to the existing?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Craig, yes, that is correct. The intent is to bore 2 new tunnels on alignment through the existing tunnel. So to remove the existing infrastructure and put a completely new tunnel within that alignment. So
I see. That answered my second question. I was going to ask what was going to be the future for the existing tunnels, but that they're going to actually be bored and then lined in the same place.
That is correct.
And so while that's happening, this can't happen in one season. What about irrigation water delivery while the construction is going on?
Mr. Chairman, the current plan, we have talked extensively about that, and I guess the first part of that question is, or the answer to that is, all construction will have to take place in a non-irrigation season. So contingency plans have to be put into place that if you are not through the entire length of the tunnel before water turns back on, and part of the advantage of a SEM, sequential excavation method tunnel, is that you're replacing sections as you go. You're putting in the new concrete one section at a time. So when you get, if you're halfway through and you get complicating factors, you could stop, turn the water back on, and then come back to it next year. The idea is currently that we believe it will probably take 2 years, but depending on the bids and the construction, it'd be better to be able to do both construction of both tunnels at the same time in 1 year. But that all depends on the contractor and how, what they come to us with their bids and the size of their crew. It'd be preferable to do both tunnels at once in 1 year, starting in September, with the hopefully construction done by May of the next year.
And I assume that the irrigation districts are comfortable with that plan?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we are. We, like Corey said, we would like to have it completed in one season, of course. Save money, save time. We'd be done in one season, but that may take 2 contractors. We just don't know yet. And not to get off topic here, but just on November 16th, we are going to have a short little tour and informational meeting at GID and go on site for anyone who would be interested. Hopefully some of you have gotten, or all of you have gotten an email from me or one of my staff. So I would just like to invite anyone out for that. If you need more information, you can get a hold of me. So.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the good questions on this project because they're all ones that we've grappled with in the boardroom at GID ourselves. One of the things we really hope that environmental study can be shortened up because without the design work done there, they're leery to give us any answer as to how they're going to treat it. So that's what we're trying to get done. And I think you guys have a meeting with Bureau of Rec, the director, here shortly. Is that right, Kevin? Could you explain that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, tomorrow I'm actually flying out to California to National Water Resource Association meeting. The commissioner of the Bureau will be there, Mrs. I forgot her name, Tootin. And we actually have a one-on-one meeting with her tomorrow and hopefully present our problems, get her in the loop of where we're at if she's not aware of it already, and see what help she may provide. And that was one of the Bureau's problems, talking with our area manager. Until we have a design, they just really cannot say that they'll do how much NEPA we will have to have, I guess.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm assuming based on what you just said that the Bureau is going to be the lead federal agency and will write a record of decision on the NEPA document. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, they will. We'll kind of be doing things in line along with all the engineering. As soon as we get to certain points, will be shared with the Bureau all along the way, and so they will be abreast of all the design right along.
So Jason's shaking his head. It's going to be a BOR, lead federal agency. They'll write the record of decision on the NEPA.
Mr. Chairman, I would anticipate that. I would imagine BLM may need to be a cooperating agency because of the lands that they possess over Tunnel 2.
If they choose to be cooperating, they can just comment on it too.
But I would expect BOR to be the lead. And then they would be doing the work for BOR. BOR would review it and provide the record, I guess, yeah.
Thank you.
So everybody understands kind of what we're prepared to do with the legislation tomorrow at the meeting in general? Okay. All right, the next project, and we're getting fairly close to the end of the projects here, is the Kirby Ditch Irrigation District Pipeline. That's under tab L, which is page 74. Give everybody just a quick second to get to page 74. So this is a more or less a modification of an existing appropriation. This is for the Kirby Irrigation District Pipeline 2020 project. The original intent of the project was convert approximately 13,000 linear feet of canal to pipeline, and the cost estimate was 2.3 million, 2.31, which was the prior appropriation. And in the most recent cost estimates, because of everything else we've heard about on other projects, has affected this one as well. The most current project cost estimate's $5 million to complete the project. So with the sponsor basically taking on a 33% loan for the cost of the project, they just don't see how they can afford a 33% loan on $5 million. They're kind of strapped at the original project cost. So what they would like to do would be to basically just line, or I should say put the ditch into pipe in the section that's the worst for them, which is kind of a section that's perched on a hill, that's prone to washout, has a lot of maintenance associated with it. And that would cut the length of the pipeline or conversion from ditch to pipeline down to about 6,600 feet. But that's what they can afford, and that's what they're proposing. And I think we would recommend that as well, so they can get that piece taken care of. Maybe at some point in the future, when they're able to pay off that loan, they'd be back to do the rest of the canal. I'd ask if there's any questions on that. Okay.
Are there any questions? Hearing none?
Andrew? You wanna hit on
Andrew.
that? So the next project is a planning study that went through the proposal and consultant selection process this year. And that is under tab Q. So I will tell you. You want to give me what's that? Page 92. 92. Yeah. So this is the GBID Upper Sunshine Outlet Works Rehab. There were three different alternatives proposed during the interview process. Commissioner Choma and Commissioner Suker were involved in that selection committee. And I think at the end of the interview process, there were still some questions, outstanding questions that we wanted to answer and bring back to the selection committee and the sponsor to really determine what the budget needed to be for the project and which alternative we were going to pursue. So Andrew Lynch, who's in the Dam and Reservoir Division, is the project manager assigned to this project. I'm going to turn it over to him to kind of tell you about the conversations he's had with the consultants since then and the direction that we're going to go. Gotta push the button.
As Jason said, this is Andrew with Water Development Office. I was in the interview with Commissioner Choma and Suker. Can everybody hear me?
Closer.
Okay. So there was a few questions that were remaining after we had that project. So this is a rehab of Upper Sunshine Reservoir for the Grable Valley Irrigation District. They wanted to do just a quick overview of the project. It's a 1938 reservoir. Everything's working okay, but it is getting older, and they wanted to take care of there's some maintenance items that need to be taken care of. And so it's aging infrastructure that needs to be addressed potentially in the future. So they came to us with a study to look at alternatives to rehab the outlet works. And we had one consultant on the project that proposed three different options. Two of those options involved dewatering the reservoir. And the third option, which is the preferred option, involved divers and remote operated vehicles. Some of the questions that were left hanging kind of there was, can we get, if we're not going to dewater the reservoir, how do we inspect the pipe? because one of the advantages to dewatering the reservoir was we could get a better test result on the pipe with an electromagnetic scan and laser profiling of the pipe. That laser profiling would give us, if there were any egging of the pipe or deflections, which would give us not only condition of the steel penstock itself, but also the concrete encasement around it and the foundation through the dam. So there was some advantage to that as well with the electromagnetic testing to see how the steel was holding up after all these years of being underground. That option was only available though if we could get the upper gate closed on the reservoir to keep water from flowing through the pipe. This is a 900-foot pipe, 6 foot in diameter, that goes under the dam. So we talked to the consultant, what can we do? We talked to the district, how successful they've been in the past with getting that upper gate closed. This upper gate is on steel wheels underwater with a cable, coal tar cable, it's old. And they've only closed it a couple of times, back in the 90s one time and then early 2000s another time. And each time they had done that, there was not only oxygen deficiency in the pipe, but quite a bit of water still flowing through it just because that gate wasn't designed to seal perfectly. And so to get this electromagnetic laser unit in there, the pipe would need to have no more than 4 to 6 inches of water flowing through it. So because of that unknown of getting the pipe dewatered completely with the water still in the reservoir, decided to see if there was another alternative. So the consultant talked to their diving company, their sub-consultant, and they determined that they could use an ROV with an acoustic scanner that also could do a 3D profile of the pipe and give us similar data to the laser. And then we could do an ultrasonic scanning, point testing of the pipe to get an idea of its integrity as far as corrosion. So, and we could do that without draining the reservoir. Caveat was we needed to get the reservoir down to a depth below 100 feet for the divers, or else it was going to increase the cost of the divers. So we talked to the district on that, and they were willing to work with us as long as we had some flexibility on the time of year so they could move the water. They have 3 different reservoirs up there. There's Upper Sunshine, Lower Sunshine, and Roach Gulch. And so they could move that water between their reservoirs strategically so that it had less of an impact on their operations. So the final option was still the same cost as the first one. They could do this 3D multi-beam acoustic scan for no additional cost because we were already going to use that technology to scan underwater and get a profile of the sediment around the upper guard gate. And so they can use that same through the pipe. So the proposal is the option 1 for the divers, but these are kind of the process we went through to conclude on that and some changes that happened along the way. There's quite a bit more to it that I could go into detail, but I think that kind of summarizes. Is there any questions? The price amount was $621,000, as you can see on the recommendation there. So the divers were a pretty expensive alternative.
The reason we wanted to talk about this one today is the planning projects, obviously we've vetted quite a bit already. We had our May meeting where we went thoroughly through all the planning projects. We've now gone through the consultant selection process. And this is just one of them where my plan tomorrow when we get to planning studies is to go pretty quickly through them because they've not changed since May. We're just now plugging in the numbers that we've received after the consultant selection. But this one, being as it was a little bit outstanding on the decision with the interview team, we wanted to bring that back to the group just to bring everybody up to speed on how those discussions went and the direction that it ended up going. So just ask if there's any questions about it.
Questions?
Chairman,
Yes, Commissioner.
I do have just a comment, I guess. But didn't we also talk about the draining of the reservoir? And if we did, the amount of fill factor that would happen and the cost, the difference in the cost of the 2 proposals, whether that reservoir was drained to do the inspection or whether it was not. Would you elaborate a little bit on those?
So we talked about the impact of draining the reservoir, and a previous study we'd done up there for the district in the Dam and Reservoir Division, we had a state mod model, so we could model scenarios of what it would look like if they drain that reservoir. So the consultant that is proposing on this project was actually the same consultant that did that modeling. And he put together sort of pro bono for the project, two different scenarios, that if they were to drain the reservoir, there was a 19% chance that the district irrigators would have more shortages than normal. There was also a 35% chance that they would not refill that reservoir to a normal level, expected level the following year. So we discussed that with the district, and they wanted to keep the water in the reservoir because of the value of that to them and their district. So is that?
What's the difference in cost between draining and non-draining?
Yeah, like cost.
So, well,
Generally.
570,000 versus 620.
So, Mr. Chairman, we're talking $50,000. It's not a small amount of money, but I think at the same time, if you were to drain that reservoir, I think we estimated roughly 15,000 acre feet of water.
More than that if it
More
was
than
the
that.
normal pool.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the economic value of that to that district is, on a much larger scale than $50,000. So I can understand the reluctance of that district wanting to drain that reservoir and potentially not filling it the following year, and the economic impacts to less crop production. So
22,000 acre feet was that number.
So we needed to balance the factor of who would pay for the additional money to allow it not to be drained. So, and I guess we made that decision that we would allow it to stay where it is, or some drainage, and not charge them for the drainage, or not charge them to keep it full, correct?
Yes.
The difference in the cost we would absorb, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and Mr. Chairman, when they come around to actually trying to fix this, it's going to be a multi-million-dollar project. So I think the time for the skin in the game is going to be when they have to come up with their 33% or whatever it ends up being to get that actually fixed or lined or whatever it's going to look like to rehab those outlet works, rather than asking them to participate further in the planning study. But that's just my opinion.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner.
Might also add, would help Mr. Kudlow understand the logistics of this project a little bit. The Upper Sunshine Reservoir is an off-stream reservoir filled by a canal off the Grable River. And there's only a certain period of time that they can even put water into that canal in the spring, during spring runoff. And so if they totally drain that reservoir and snowpack wasn't awful close to 100%, it's very likely it would not be refilled. And that reservoir, along with Lower Sunshine and Roach Gulch, are the entire storage supplies for the Emblem Bench area west of Grable, significant amount of irrigated cropland. And the economic impact would be pretty significant if that reservoir wasn't refilled.
It ties into what Commissioner Craig was just talking about. Are we built in a contingency? Running through the analysis, I'm sure they looked at average hydrology. We could run into a really dry year where there's sufficient storage capacity and lower Sunshine and Reservoir and Roach Gulch to carry that. I'm just saying, under a scenario where that happens, are we prepared to go in there and go ahead and move that? Just seems to me there ought to be a contingency. In fact, if this moves forward, we get a 65, 70% snowpack. If there's adequate capacity to move that water into Lower Sunshine and Roach Gulch, I get that we don't want to drain any water out of a reservoir. We have to. I'm just saying there may be natural hydrological conditions that would facilitate that. It's just a contingency going forward. Is that contemplated?
So we could use a different option to,
No, I think,
or how would we?
I think what Senator Hicks is saying is if we got to the point where, and it's actually going to be work that's done in the fall.
That's what I mean. You'll know.
Yeah, so we're going to know what the snowpack looks like. If we needed to move water, and of course, we don't know what the next year is going to look like, is there potential to store it in Roach Gulch or Lower Sunshine when if they have to evacuate some water to get down to a point where the divers can get in there where it's less than a 100-foot dive so they can be more efficient with their diving. I think that'll be something that we consider as the plan is developed, for sure, so we don't waste any water if we can prevent it. But
They're willing to do that with the smaller amount of water, but
Yeah.
not the completely draining, because
Yeah.
that's more than they can put down below and may limit them on filling the next year.
Yeah, I'm just saying that you want to maximize the amount of water you move into the lower facility. It's the first one on the system.
Yeah.
It's the one that's going to divert right out of the Grable. So to facilitate just to reduce cost, it just ought to be explicit up front that we need to maximize the storage and lower and Roach Gulch. It'll even make it easier for the divers because they'll have better visibility and a whole bunch of issues, you know.
And Mr. Chairman, that's not something a consultant can necessarily dictate. That's going to have to be a management decision for the district itself. And I'm sure that will be,
Discussed up.
yeah, exactly.
It's
Yep.
just a management problem, but
They actually requested that we work with them on the timing of that.
Sure.
So that they can move it between it appropriately. And I said, I think we should be able to do that. We do need to give the divers enough time to get it on their schedule, but
So those discussions will be had as we get the plan pulled together. Yeah. Any other questions about that project? If not, we're going to move on to UW Water Research, which would be our last discussion item for this particular agenda.
Thank you, Andrew.
what page?
Excuse me?
Is there a page number?
Oh, yeah. 303.
How would you know that?
Tab K, or I'm sorry, tab C3, or yeah, page 303. And I'll hand it over to Greg Kerr.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Greg Kerr, the Director of the University of Wyoming Office of Water Programs. And in your notebooks today, we're presenting some information on the Water Research Program fiscal year 2023 research proposals. This is broken up kind of into three areas that we're looking at in the recommendation. The first part gives some information on the water research program and process that we have for selecting and funding research proposals to address issues in the state of Wyoming. The second phase of your notebook lists our timeline that we have for selecting proposals, the process that we go through in looking at all of the proposals that we receive. And then thirdly is information on the individual proposals themselves and their associated cost recommendation and information on what they plan to do, hopefully in layman's terms, along with a statement of relevance there. So if you recall at your May meeting, we had our RFP developed and was approved by both the Select Water Committee and the Commission. That RFP was then released to the campus research community for water in the end of August of this year. After that, proposals were due from researchers on campus with a due date of October 1st. And after that, we begin our peer review process, which we are in that process right now, looking at peer reviews. And presented to you today is a listing of the 4 proposals that we received under this RFP and associated information. If we look at those individual proposals and their associated costs, we received 3 proposals that are 3 years in length. 1 proposal is 2 years in length. This information is all provided to you today. Only, again, Thursday we'll have a chance to talk about that. If you want to look these over and you have any questions on Thursday, I'll be happy to discuss with you at that time our process and what those proposals entail. So this is our recommendation that's being brought forward. If you have any questions now, I'd be happy to talk to you about them.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. Are there any questions? Hearing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next.
So we're actually moving on to the last agenda item for the workshop, which is the emergency water projects account discussion. And this is just a precursor to maybe some of the Select Water Committee discussion tomorrow during their meeting. But so if everybody recalls back earlier this year, I don't remember exactly which month, but Interstate Canal breached in southeast Wyoming. And at the time, I was having quite a few conversations with Senator Steinmetz and others on whether or not our emergency water project account would be something that could be utilized for that project. And it worked out, or unfortunately maybe, that the Pathfinder Irrigation District out of Nebraska is responsible for the operation and maintenance of that facility. Therefore, we couldn't participate. But it raised a question when we were looking back. We haven't utilized this fund or program yet, but I want to direct your attention to the e-notebook, not the recommendations notebook, but the regular e-notebook, page 31, which is where the Select Water Committee materials lie. So if you could try to navigate to that, and if anybody's having any trouble, we can get you there before I continue. Yeah, so we're not in the recommendations e-notebook anymore, but the meeting e-notebook. And when you find that, I actually want you to go to page 33 of that PDF. Or it's tab D, as in dog. Are we all there or getting pretty close? Doesn't look like not quite yet. We'll give it a few more minutes here.
It's in the e-notebook.
Can you help them?
But it's got to be in the e-notebook.
We know what page?
33.
33.
33 of 56. What you should see.
In the page number to go straight to the. You can always just search and put like melody in it, and then it'll go down to the melody. So you're working this case. Any word in the doc. So emergency. You can search emergency. It is a statute. Are we there yet?
Everybody there? Okay, so on page 33, you'll see the section H. And I'm just going to start reading down through that. You can follow me. So it says, the commission shall adopt rules providing for eligibility determination procedures and criteria for the application award of funds from the emergency water project account, which we've done. Then it goes on to say, and this is the sentence that I've been keying on, the total amount awarded under this subsection shall not exceed $3 million per fiscal biennium. Then it goes on to say the maximum grant amount awarded for each emergency water project shall not exceed 75-25 grant loan. And then goes on to talk about what the loan up to 50 years, 4%. So going back to that sentence, the total amount awarded under this subsection shall not exceed $3 million per fiscal biennium is a bit ambiguous. And it was a conversation I had with Senator Steinmetz on, does that mean we can only fund $3 million worth of emergency projects per biennium, or that we can only fund, or that we could fund a project up to $3 million per biennium? And I think the quick read that we're receiving from our representative, AG's representative, is that probably reads all projects combined could not exceed $3 million per biennium. And I wanted to, I guess, understand maybe the intent we all had when we put that language together in the first place. If it was, we wanted to fund up to a $3 million emergency project, or indeed it was only $3 million spent on emergency projects in a given 2-year period. So my recollection was that the intent would probably be up to a $3 million project. But I wanted to just have that general discussion with everybody, because this may require, and I think it would probably be a question for the LSO eventually between now and the next meeting on how they read that, and if this is going to require something we can take care of and just, we know the intent, we can administer the program the way we think we should, or if we need to do something a little further in our rules, because the rules doesn't go back and specify a project total amount,
So-
and or whether it would need a statute change.
So, Mr. Chairman, the intent is up to $3 million a project. I mean, if you got a major flood, you could be funding different irrigation districts, municipal water intakes. It wasn't $3 million total for the program. There is some ambiguity there. It seems to me that the best way to handle that, and I'll ask our LSO staff, is just would be to include that section H in the omnibus water bill and just make it clear that it's $3 million per project during any fiscal biennium. So it's just adding like $3 million per project to make sure, if there's already some ambiguity, and we might as well clean it up in statute right now. And I think we could probably do that in the omnibus water bill by just including that as subsection 8 under 41, and just add those couple of words, and then it's clear. But that's what the original intent was when we set this account up. It wasn't $3 million for a biennium, a 2-year period. You may get multiple projects. It's insufficient funding to accomplish what the intent was.
I'm going to ask, and I know this is really an LSO question, I think, is it appropriate, is that something we can put into the construction bill to amend a statute like this? I know that's how we amend
I think
all
if
of our
it's in the title,
projects. If it's what,
you
sorry?
make sure that it's in the title of the bill. So it would be an appropriation plus, all as it's covered in the title. And you could do it as a separate bill too.
Yeah. I like the idea.
It's just such a small adding per year or per project. That's all we're gonna add, is about 2 words in there.
My
We got
preference would
an
be
LSO
not to,
staffer in the back, I will defer to him, but I think as long as we include that this modifies section, whatever it would be eligible.
okay. So Mr. Chairman, I think what I'm hearing, I guess, would be direction, and obviously there'll be discussion on this tomorrow. And maybe there doesn't need to be a whole lot of discussion because this is kind of the gist of it.
And so what we'll do is we'll just make a motion tomorrow to do that as the select water committee and then let LSO determine if for some reason they can't stick it in the omnibus bill, we'll just have them do it as a separate bill. It's so minor that I really don't want to waste all the committee time and the bill time and the explanation of the floor time to add 2 words to clean up and clarify a statute versus it'll just fly through in the omnibus bill. It's just a time management thing.
Yeah.
If we can do it, would be better for us.
Mr. Chairman, that makes sense to me, if it needs to be a statute change.
Mr. Chair, would we a motion on that tomorrow then as well?
Mr. Chairman, I kind of feel like this is more of a select water committee item.
Because it's a statutory change. I mean, you guys can make a motion that you recommend that we clarify. I mean, there's nothing wrong with providing guidance so that it's consistent. So.
Sure.
But it will require a statutory change.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I guess, if you made a motion that you support the change, I think that there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. We administer the program, so we have a stake in it, so.
Commissioner Cayley, if you could make that motion, that'd be great. Thank you.
Well, and Mr.
You're sitting next to him.
Mr. Chairman, the interesting about that, now that I think about it, is that we don't have anything on our agenda for this tomorrow. It's on the Select Water Committee agenda, so you won't really be under the
Duly
gavel or
noted that
whatever,
the
so.
commission, I think, makes a recommendation that we.
We can
clarify the
sure,
statute.
we can sure add it at the end to just have a short discussion. We can make the motion. That's fine too. I'll try to remember to do that.
Thank you. Next.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I had for today. So I think just in general, the conversations we've had about how we've gone about trying to stretch the dollars and keep projects moving is that if everybody's agreeable to that and agree, tomorrow and the next day should go fairly smoothly. So that's kind of why I wanted to have that conversation now, because everything has been based on that theory of kind of going about the shovel ready and then what's next to keep the hopper moving and keep us moving forward in the future. So
Mr. Chairman, I had a couple items just to throw out there for maybe a little discussion. And again, this is kind of like a reoccurring request, is to look at changing the dates of the December meeting. You've got the chairman of the Select Water Committee, the vice chairman of the Select Water Committee, and three other members that are on the Appropriations Committee. And it's impossible for us to be doing budget hearings and budget markup and make the same time. And I just would ask again that the commission look at moving those dates not to conflict with those budget hearings, so that we've got more than half of the members of the Senate that are, on the Select Water Committee or on the Appropriations Committee, and a couple on the House side too. So it just makes it very difficult for us. And then I hope that would alleviate some of the, because we don't see and have all the discussions that you guys have had when you're going through the omnibus water bill, led to some confusion and I guess some misunderstandings on some of the projects later on. And so I can't tell you what the makeup of the Select Water Committee is going to be a year from now, but it's been problematic, I think, for the last couple of years, if that's possible.
So, Mr. Chairman, this is the future schedule was on our agenda for Thursday. And if we want to just have that discussion now, I think that would be appropriate. It's 5:03, but hey, we're just going to hotels and dinner, so we might as well have the discussion now, if everybody's okay with that. And we can finalize it on Thursday. So Barry, if you want to talk through the future meeting schedule. And so we are in the same e-notebook that we were for this conversation on emergency water projects. Page 55.
Tab I.
What's that?
Tab I.
It's tab I. My 55 is, it's 'cause I took that out. I don't have it with me.
Okay.
Is everybody on that page? Yep. So I guess we're talking about this December 1st.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Chairman, Barry Lawrence, Deputy Director of Planning, Water Development. If you turn to tab I, as Jason has indicated, first thing you'll see there is the remaining schedule for this year. And just so Chairman Hicks knows, at our August meeting, we worked with Senator Simpson, Representative Simpson, and we got the December dates changed. And so it was moved up a week. And so you'll see now that the commission meeting is on the 5th and 6th, workshop and meeting, and then the following day was select water. And here again, we worked with Chairman Simpson to get that done, and that was approved at the August meeting. Okay, so that's been moved up. And if so please, I'll go into the 2023 schedule unless there's questions.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I don't know, I don't remember in the past if Select Water Committee members have attended the Water Development Commission discussion.
Sometimes.
But that's more than welcome in case so there's no surprises between the two different entities, but not necessary, but anyway.
Okay. Moving on, the last page is the proposed 2023 schedule. And just to remind you, I think you all know that this coming year is a long session of the legislature. And so that means we'll have 5 sets of meetings during the year. The first set would be in March, and typically Select Water meets at the privilege of the chairman near the end of the session. And that would be to go through, make recommendations relative to our level 1, 2, 3 contracts, small water project program, and so forth. That would be near the end of the session at their prerogative when they want to have that meeting. And then the commission would then meet the following week right after sessions scheduled to go through the 10th. It would be the following week. Tuesday, Wednesday, we've got set tentatively for the workshop on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday would be the actual meeting. In addition to the contract approval at that time, we would also be looking at election of officers. And we've heard you loud and clear relative to days of the week. We've stayed off Friday. And so you'll see most of these meetings for the whole year are on Tuesday, Wednesdays, or Thursdays. The May meeting then is our joint meeting, Commission Select Water, again, about the same time, middle of May, and that's where you hear about all the new applications, all the new level 1, 2 projects that are coming, the applications that we received, and so forth. And then we don't have another meeting till August. That is also joint. That is where we have our workshop and summer tour. And typically we set the location of that summer tour. We would set that at our next meeting here coming up in December, where we want to go in the summer. But that would be our summer tour meeting, and we typically have that in the middle of August. It's all timed also such that we can deliver the proposals to the commissioners that are involved in consultant selection at that time at that meeting. And then moving forward, our October set of meetings, that is commission only, and that's where we do consultant selection and so forth, and selection approval. That's typically the first week of October, and I realize that's hunting season, and I get grief for that, but it is what it is, and that's how it works out. And then finally, and the one we probably need to talk about a little bit is the November set of meetings. We have a lot going on that, we're coming out of that October, the consultant selection, and then with the September 1 deadline for level 3 applications, we've got to get everything put together for this big, large meeting, as you know, today. But we've got it set for the first full week in November. I will tell you that November 10th is Veterans Day, which is a Friday. So we said Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but I need to bring this up. Tuesday is Election Day, but it is 2023. I'm not sure how much will be in the docket at that time, if that's going to be a problem for folks or not. One of the problems we run into if we run into Veterans Day is obviously venues and so forth, and federal state folks, it's supposed to be a state holiday, federal holiday. So we try to stay off Veterans Day if possible. So right now we've got it slated for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 7, 8, and 9.
We have a proposed
Right. Like today. Correct, right, because the following's.
We usually do budget markup. So we do budget hearing is biennial budget in December. And we usually come back the first full week of January to do the actual. A week and a half to do the actual.
Right.
So it's, it's our ways, but it's just something.
Sure. Mhm. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that sounds good to everybody then. We'll just, on Thursday at the end of the meeting, we'll just get a motion from the commission to approve that future meeting schedule, and we've already kind of had the discussion, so.
So that was just December 7th.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman, for select water. That was, as I said, we worked with Chairman Simpson to come up with that date.
Well, he lucked out because management council just moved other than just starting on the day.
Okay.
You did a good job there, Chairman Simpson.
So, Mr. Chairman, again, we don't have anything else on the workshop agenda, but knowing there's a storm on Thursday, it's, not too far after 5, which we're all used to working after 5, right? If you want, we can provide you guys some couple of quick updates that we were going to provide on as part of the discussion item on Thursday at the end of the meeting. And it would be a quick LaPrel update, which the commission heard back in October, but that wasn't a select water committee meeting. And then maybe a quick update from Chase Tavelli on the critical aging irrigation infrastructure study and how that's going. Would you prefer to do that now, or would you prefer to do that on Thursday? Now? Okay. All right, Chase, you can head up here. In the meantime, I'll start talking about LaPrel. So LaPrel, we were waiting, Chase and myself put together some information. The Bureau asked for additional information. I think it was back in August. I can't remember for sure. To make a determination if the project was going to be eligible under the CARE Act legislation under the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So, and then, so the governor was awaiting a letter from Commissioner Tootin on that, those additional, that information request. Anyway, Governor Gordon received that letter, and it said 2 things. One, that the funding for LaPrel would be non-reimbursable, which is a federal term for grant money. And then 2, that the LaPrel Dam reconstruction or rehabilitation was indeed eligible for that pot of funding. So that's good news. And then since then, we've been working with the Bureau of Reclamation to set up a meeting with their financial assistance office, kind of get things kicked off and get more details. And we had a meeting scheduled. Unfortunately, they wanted to make sure they had all the right people at that meeting. And so we're postponing it and trying to come up with a new date because they want to make sure this is unique legislation. They want to make sure they have all their ducks in a row, so we're not taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. So it makes sense. We're in close conversation with them. We know they're working to get that meeting rescheduled. And I think in the meantime, they have some information that they know they're going to need from the district and the state of Wyoming on the LaPrel project, such as scope of work, budget, schedule, and that'll lead to them helping them put together fiscal year budgets in the future on the project. So we're getting started on trying to collect some of that information in anticipation of this meeting getting set up with the Bureau of Reclamation Financial Assistance Office. So just a quick update. I provided that, like I said, to the commission in October, but you guys may get questions as we get closer to the session. So I wanted to make sure the Select Water Committee was up to speed on that. So we're anticipating that meeting to be set up here in the next several weeks. And then we'll maybe have another update if that indeed happens at the December meeting, but it'll just have to wait and see when we get that meeting set up. So,
Mr. Chairman, Director, would you remind me as to how much money that we had asked for in that application for LaPrel, or have we not specified a dollar amount yet?
Mr. Chairman, it wasn't really an application. This all came through.
Eligibility request.
Yeah, the statute language says there's $100 million available for CARE Act projects or reconstruct. I don't remember the exact language, but we don't know if we're the only CARE Act project that's eligible for the project would be the caveat to that.
At least we're the only one that I know of now.
So any more questions on LaPrelle? Otherwise, we'll let Chase give you a quick update on how the critical aging irrigation infrastructure, what's the short name for that?
CAII.
The CAII study.
Sounds like an insurance company.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Chase Tavelli, Water Development Office, here to give you an update since August. Excuse me. A lot of progress, a lot of positive feedback so far. We've completed 6 of the 10 meetings around the state. Next week, we will have 3, one in Riverton, one in Powell, one in Warland, beginning on the 8th. And then the following week will be in Torrington, and that'll close everything out. Everybody at this table should have received an invitation to one of these meetings. We wanted to make sure that you were welcome and that you knew that we were going to have a meeting and come see what we were doing for you. They've been very well attended. Laramie had 40, Casper had 45, and Saratoga and Lyman came in at 25, which I think is really good. And most of that is because of phone calls and personal invitations. There's been a lot of press that has gone out. Conservation districts have done a good job, and then word of mouth we're hearing is getting a lot of people to attend. You know, you've got irrigators, NRCS, conservation districts, the press is attending. So lot of attendance, a lot of diverse attendance. The meeting itself is kind of a 2-part meeting. The first part, we talk about the project, and our consultant discusses their approach to the scope of work. And then one of the questions that we heard early on is, well, we know what's wrong with our infrastructure. How do we fund it? How do we get it paid for? That's the $1 million question. And so the second part of our program is I give a short Water Development Office, here's what we can do for you. The Bureau of Reclamation provided us with a recording with a PowerPoint because they couldn't commit to coming to every meeting that we play. And then there's been an NRCS representative at every single meeting and is planned to be at the remaining meetings as well to give a talk on RCPP and EQIP and PL 566. And then we have another recorded presentation on more non-traditional type funding alternatives, such as the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust, Trout Unlimited, and Game and Fish, just how some of those funding options are being used for projects. One of the things that the consultant told us they were going to do in their interview was contact all 157 entities that are a part of our irrigation system survey. To date, they've contacted 139, and they informed me that there's about 33 remaining, which is more than 157 because through word of mouth, they've found out about other entities, so they're going to be making contact with them. What they try to do is when we're having a meeting in Riverton, they try to contact entities around Riverton, garner some support and talk about projects that they might have, et cetera, and try to get them to come to the meeting. So far, we've done some site visits too. 11 entities have been visited, 26 structures have been visited with obviously more expected. The GIS database data collection is underway. They've pulled in 4 of the big irrigation districts, Midvale, Cade, Goshen, and Wheatland. And to date, that's 2,687 conveyance structures. And of those, this is from previous studies, so previous Water Development Commission studies, 262 of those structures are in poor condition and 108 are in failing. So just looking at the fact that there's 2,687 in those 4, it's a significant effort. There's a significant number of structures out there to be considered. The
Mr.
immediate
Chairman?
next steps, excuse me?
Chase, while you're on
Yes, sir.
there, when they looked at those and rated those in the past, did they try to assess any potential replacement cost or rehabilitation cost for those?
I believe so. There's yeah. So what they look at is, it's a ranking. So they take the number of acres, the type of structure, the condition, and then they add a factor of of a 100 means that it would take 100% to replace it, 100% of that cost. If it's a 50, it would be 50% to rehabilitate it. And that goes into their algorithm, and it spits out a big number at the end, and then they hit sort, and it ranks structures. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just curious when they did that before, if they said we've got $1 billion or $800 million, you know, had a total number based on, you said some of that previous work that had been done.
Right. Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, are you talking about the irrigation system surveys that we built upon? Because I know in those, there was a, you know, in the last survey, we tried to beef it up to get a better handle on this, and this is kind of building upon that. And there was a number, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, what it equated to, but it was hundreds of millions of dollars, at least the estimates from the districts themselves, which are estimates.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking about. I was
Maybe.
thinking it was almost $1 billion or more in cost.
I don't have that number in my mind right now, but I can find
It's
it
not
and let you know.
important. This will refine anything
Yeah.
that we have from that.
Sure. Okay, so immediate next steps, they're going to continue building the database with existing info and incorporating data from public meetings and the interviews that they're having. Can continue reviewing the existing information. Of course, there's around 120 Water Development Commission studies alone that they're taking into account. And there'll be a follow-up with the Bureau of Reclamation. We've had a meeting with them. One of their subs is a former Bureau of Reclamation employee. And so that's helped open the door for looking at their structures database and getting information from them with, you know, signing agreements, non-disclosure agreements. And then they'll need to begin coordination with the state engineer's office on the dam inventory and assessments for irrigation use reservoirs. And that's, in a nutshell, what is going on. A lot of positive responses so far. I know some commissioners have attended, and Senator Boner was in Casper. I'm dying to hear what he thought.
Or not.
Yeah. But everybody we've heard, there's been a couple representatives from Senator Cynthia Lummis's office that have attended, a lot of press. So we think things are going pretty good.
So where are we at time-wise as far as the schedule is laid out for public meetings and all this information? Are we on time?
So we're doing well, yeah. And the meetings we scheduled every other week, except for Torrington's kind of tag Aaron on the end. And that was so that they could contact districts, entities, and, you know, do the interviews and try to get them to come to the meeting. So every other week, we're on time. The draft is September 1 of 23. And then at the November meeting, that will be the final presentation for that study. And then the final report is due December 31st of 23, but we are on time. Yeah, things are going good.
The one comment I'd like to make is, and we've been talking about this at the meetings, is that we're not planning to make this information public. This is critical aging irrigation infrastructure. The last thing we want to do is serve it up on our website for everybody to see. And we're hoping that'll set the minds of the districts at ease to be forthcoming. But I think it's a general trend that I would like to implement into the future on all of our studies. There's sensitive information in some of them, not all of them, but so we're probably going to be working towards pulling some of that stuff, the majority of our reports, off the website, but then having a process where if somebody's interested in getting it, you know, we kind of vet who that is. They get a temporary password, for example. None of this has worked out. It's just kind of thoughts at this point, and possibly signing a non-disclosure agreement like we would have to do if we got information from the Bureau of Rec, just to secure the information a little bit better.
So on that issue, I would tell you that you need to consult with your AGs really quick.
And we have,
Historically,
yeah.
the Wyoming Supreme Court's taken a very dim view of publicly collected and paid for information and then not allowing that under. Now, that doesn't mean you have to publish it. It just has to be publicly available if there's a records request put in. And so it's a fine needle that has to be threaded.
And we're having some discussions and plan on having more with the AG's office about this, but
And there is some provisions in the Public Records Act that precludes private information. You know, in other words, my friend's here, diversion structures and really crappy, you can't use his name, you know, but
yeah.
that really needs to be well thought out on how we shield that information.
Yep.
Maybe it's just not a public document, but it's publicly available. But
With
that-
a little bit of an effort
Yeah,
to get to it.
but
And,
we're dealing
some
with this
vetting.
issue right now
Yeah.
with game and fish on some stuff, but it's, we just don't want to
Yeah.
make
Point
sure we
taken.
get it right the first time.
Yep. So any other questions for Chase on how that study's going so far? A lot of work left to do, obviously, but we're getting the word out, and I think people are feeling comfortable with what we're doing. So. Okay.
Thank you, Chase. I have just one more issue, and it concerns potentially dinner tomorrow night. If Select Water and the commission or anyone else is interested in potentially joining us in one large dinner room, which has yet to be arranged, just think about it tonight and get together tomorrow morning and see if we can pull that off.
Is the commission buying? Hell yeah. We're all in.
Yes. Okay, with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Several so moved. Do I hear a second? Second. Adjourned. Done. Nobody objected.
I was pretty happy. Nothing.